House will please be in order. Those persons not having privileges of the floor will please vacate the chamber at this time, and all members and guests in the galleries will please rise as we are led in prayer this morning by Pastor Jim Butcher. Pastor Butcher is the guest of the gentleman, the 23rd, Delegate Miller. Amen. Members and guests will please remain standing as we are led in the Pledge of Allegiance by the gentleman, the 23rd, Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would guests in the gallery please join us as we pledge allegiance to our flag? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members and guests may be seated. Reading of the Journal.
Journal of the House of Delegates, Tuesday, January 21st, 2020.
Gentleman, the 63rd, Delegate Hardy.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of the journal be dispensed with and be approved as being read.
Gentleman, the 63rd, Delegate Hardy, asks unanimous consent that further reading of the journal be dispensed with and it be approved as having been read. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Lady from the 49th for an update on the calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Rules Committee has made the following changes to the calendar. On special calendar second reading, HJR 102 is moved to the House calendar. On second reading, committee substitute for House Bill 4094 has been moved to the House calendar. Under first reading on special calendar, committee substitute for House Bill 4388 has been moved to the House calendar.
Report to standing committees.
Your Committee on Banking and Insurance has had under consideration House Bill 4361 relating to insurance law violations, reports the same back with amendment, with recommendation that it do pass as amended, that it be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
The report will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Your Committee on Banking and Insurance has had under consideration House Bill 4229, Insurance Commission, Medicare Supplement Insurance, and House Bill 4297, Insurance Commission Credit for Reinsurance, reports the same back with recommendation that they each do pass, that they be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
The report will be received. Both bills will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Your Committee on Banking and Insurance has had under consideration House Bill 4410, permitting directors and executive officers of a banking institution to borrow from a banking institution with which he or she is connected, reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass, that it be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
The report will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 4166, prohibiting certain sex offenders from being in a supervisory position over children, reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass.
The report will be received.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 4129 relating to adoption, reports back a committee substitute, therefore, with recommendation that the committee substitute do pass.
The report will be received.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 4092 relating to foster care, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass as amended, that it be referred to Committee on Finance.
The report will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Health and Human Resources has had under consideration House Bill 4317, Board of Pharmacy rules for registration of pharmacy technicians, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that it do pass as amended, that it be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
The report will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Your Committee on Health and Human Resources has had under consideration House Bill 4246, Board of Pharmacy rules for immunizations administered by pharmacists and pharmacy interns, House Bill 4247, Board of Examiners for registered professional nurses, requirements for registration and licensure and conduct, House Bill 4254, Board of Acupuncture, auricular detoxification therapy, House Bill 4301, Medical Imaging and Radiation Therapy Technology, Board of Examiners, rules relating to the board, House Bill 4302, Board of Medicine, licensure, disciplinary, and complaint procedures, continuing education, physician assistants, House Bill 4312, Board of Optometry, rules for the West Virginia Board of Optometry, House Bill 4313, Board of Osteopathic Medicine, osteopathic physician assistants, House Bill 4315, Board of Pharmacy, licensure and practice of pharmacy, House Bill 4316, Board of Pharmacy, record keeping and automated data processing systems, House Bill 4318, Board of Pharmacy rules for centralized prescription processing, House Bill 4319, Board of Pharmacy regulations governing pharmacy permits, House Bill 4320, Board of Pharmacy regulations governing pharmacists, House Bill 4322, Board of Physical Therapy, general provisions for for physical therapists and physical therapist assistants, House Bill 4323, Board of Physical Therapy, fees for physical therapist and physical therapist assistant, House Bill 4324, Board of Physical Therapy, general provisions for athletic trainers, House Bill 4325, Board of Physical Therapy, fees for athletic trainers, House Bill 4335, Board of Examiners for registered professional nurses, request for waiver of initial licensing fees for certain individuals, House Bill 4336, West Virginia Board of Respiratory Care, establishment of fees, House Bill 4337, West Virginia Board of Respiratory Care, student limited permit, reports the same back with recommendation that each do pass, that they be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
The report will be received. All bills will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Your Committee on Energy has had under consideration House Bill 4348, Department of Environmental Protection, West Virginia Surface Mining Reclamation Rule, reports the same back with amendment with recommendation that do pass as amended, that it be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
The report will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Your Committee on Energy has had under consideration House Bill 4221, Department of Environmental Protection, Groundwater Protection Rules for Coal Mining Operations, House Bill 4223, Department of Environmental Protection, Voluntary Remediation and Redevelopment Rule, House Bill 4233, Office of Minors Health, Safety and Training, Substance Abuse Screening Standards and Procedures, House Bill 4234, Office of Minors Health, Safety and Training, Rules governing the certification, recertification, and training of EMT minors and EMT-M instructors, House Bill 4311, Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, Rules of the Commission, reports the same back with recommendation that each do pass, that to be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
Report will be received. All bills will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Your Committee on Banking and Insurance has had under consideration House Bill 4146 relating to credit for reinsurance and House Bill 4149 relating to insurance, reports the same back with recommendation that each do pass.
The report will be received.
Your Committee on Banking and Insurance has had under consideration House Bill 4411 relating to the West Virginia Residential Mortgage Lender Broker and Servicer Act, reports the same back with recommendation that do pass.
The report will be received.
Your Committee on Veterans Affairs and Homeland Security has had under consideration House Concurrent Resolution 3, researching and making recommendations regarding construction of a veterans nursing home facility in Summers County, reports back to Committee Substitute, therefore, with recommendation that it be adopted, that it be referred to the Committee on Rules.
The report will be received. The resolution will be referred to the Committee on Rules.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 4011, reorganizing various boards and authorities for the licensing and oversight of trades, occupations, and professions, reports back to Committee Substitute with recommendation that the Committee Substitute do pass.
The report will be received. Are there further reports of standing committees? If not, reports of select committees, messages from the executive, messages from the Senate.
The Clerk of the Senate announces the passage by the Senate of Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 125, prohibiting victim from being subjected to certain physical examinations for sexual offenses.
The message will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
The Senate has passed Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 217, requiring DHHR collaborate with Workforce Development Board and West Virginia Division of Personnel for job placement.
The message will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Health and Human Resources.
The Committee on Committee Substitute, the Senate has passed Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 323, authorizing Department of Administration promulgate legislative rules.
The message will be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Are there further messages from the Senate? If not, resolutions.
House Concurrent Resolution 25, Curtis, Papp, and Millie, Mammy, Asbury Bridge.
Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with, and that each resolution be considered as formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as indicated on the chamber automation system.
The lady from the 49th asks unanimous consent that further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with, and that each resolution be considered as having been formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Petitions, motions, bills introduced.
House Bill 4451 relating to charging fees for municipal service.
Lady in the 49th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with and that each bill be considered as formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committee as indicated on the chamber automation system.
The lady from the 49th asks unanimous consent that further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with and that each bill be considered as having been formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system. Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Unfinished business. Bills on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2086, Uniform Real Property Electronic Recording Act.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read? Chair hears no objections. The gentleman from the 27th delegate shot to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning. Members will recall that from time to time we take up for consideration various uniform acts that are an attempt to make our laws consistent with acts in other states, and that's what this is. This is the Uniform Real Property Electronic Recording Act, which has been enacted by 34 states and 2 United States territory. What this bill does, it authorizes county clerks to accept documents for electronic recordation. Implementation of the act by a county court is not required. County clerk is not required, so this is permissive, not mandatory. But any county clerk who accepts documents, electronic documents for recording, is also required to continue to accept paper documents and shall place entries for both type of documents in the same index. The bill directs the Commissioner of the Division of Highways to establish an advisory committee to assist in the adoption, amendment, and repeal of standards and practices. And the Commissioner is directed to propose rules for legislative approval and to submit a report to the Joint Committee on Government and Finance on or before January 1 of each year until the committee's tasks are complete. Mr. Speaker, that's a summary of the bill. I'm available for questions. I urge its passage.
Question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, then the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 95 ayes, 0 nays, 5 members absent not voting. Majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2086.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title is read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Request concurrence therein. Chair is advised that the chair did omit introduction of guests. Without objection, we'll return to introduction of guests at this time. Chair hears no objection. Are there introductions? The gentleman, the 23rd, Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple of introductions. First off, you'll notice in the various galleries, I think primarily in the South Gallery, in the lime green shirts, the members of the Carpenters, Local Union 439, and I believe from Putnam, Lincoln, Boone, Cabell, Wayne, and Kanawha counties, and I hope I didn't miss anyone. If they would please stand to be recognized and the House make them feel welcome.
Lady from the 50th, Delegate Longstreth. Pardon me, gentleman from the 23rd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of myself, gentlemen from the 22nd and the 24th, it's my pleasure to present the Honorary Secretary of State Award Program that's hosted by our Secretary of State and supported by our county clerks. The Jennings Randolph Award is named for the late U.S. Senator Jennings Randolph of West Virginia, who is considered the father of the 26th Amendment that reduced the voting age to 18. The Jennings Randolph Award is presented to those West Virginia high schools who register at least 85% of their eligible students to vote. The 2019-20 school year marks the 26th anniversary of the award. In just the last 3 years, more than 43,000 high school students here in West Virginia have been registered to vote. An honorary Secretary of State is a high school student who had a leadership role in his or her high school becoming a Jennings Randolph award-winning school. The recognition is limited to just 2 students for each high school that earns that award. Mr. Speaker, in the South Gallery today, along with Secretary of State Mac Warner, are 6 high school seniors who have earned the title of Honorary Secretary of State for leading their high school to register 100% of their eligible students to vote. And I get to brag a little bit, Mr. Speaker, that we have 3 high schools in the county and all 3 have met this award. I would like to ask each of today's special guests from Boone County Schools to stand as I read their name. We have Blake Martin and Kinsley White, along with our guidance counselor Noelle Chafin from Van High School. Haley Miller and Chloe Older from Scott High School, and Abby Bolton and Jacob Massey, along with their teacher Michael Showalter from Sherman High School. These student leaders, principals, and teachers are accompanied also today by our Boone County Clerk, Roger Toney, if he would please stand, if the House would make them feel welcome, and extend our congratulations and make these special guests welcome.
Lady in the 50th, Doug Longstreth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, on behalf of Caputo and Angelucci and myself, and from Marion County, we have a group of special people from People First of Marion County, and I'd like to introduce them if they would stand as I speak their names. Lorinda Yellick, Tabitha Yellick, John Yellick, Ryan Hawkins, Bridget Hawkins, Renee Tennant, Desiree Tennant, Marina Maddow, Scene Fazio, and Ryan Nay. And also, I'd like to say that for you all, I'd like to say thank you. They gave us a wonderful plaque to the delegates for years of supporting them in the county of our Marion County. Thank you so much for this. We appreciate it, and we appreciate all that you do.
The gentleman the 16th, Dr. Hornbuckle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, on behalf of the Cabell County delegates, I would like to introduce to the body in various galleries. We have friends from the Mountain State Centers for Independent Living. If you'll please stand up. And House, if you all would please make them feel welcome.
Gentleman the 19th, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of myself and Delegate Hicks, we have several pages today. We have two young ladies from Wayne High School. If they would please stand up. They are Olivia Queen and Madeline Perry. We also have some pages from CK Elementary. They are Jake Van Arsdale, Jacob Lucas, Ava Robertson, and Reese Fraley. Please give them a round of applause.
The gentleman the 19th, Dr. Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Along with Delegate Thompson, I'd like to introduce the rest of the pages from Wayne County with us today. And pages, as I announce your name, please stand. These pages are from Sarita Canova Elementary, 5th grade students, Lucretia Jackson, Kaylin Earwood, Tulsa Hayner, Jodis Gu, Isaiah Lewis, and one of my special pages, Dominic Hanshaw, Millie Workman, Chase Crum, Skylar Maddox, Jacob Pritt. House, please make the pages welcome.
The gentleman the 26th, Doug Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have one page with me from Mercer County. So on behalf of the delegation, Julia Vance, a very special page, a very special family to me. Her mother is accompanying her up in the South Gallery. Jerry Vance, would you make them feel welcome?
The gentleman the 48th, Doug Miley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize our colleague who's back with us today, the delegate from the 36th, Delegate Rowe. If you'd all make you feel welcome.
Gentleman the 42nd, Doug Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Lavender Bowe and I in our South Gallery is a former student of mine at Greenbrier East standing up in a top row. He's joining the Carpentry Union today. It's Bobby Wilson of White Sulphur Springs. Will the House please make him welcome?
The gentleman the 43rd, Doug Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Hartman and myself, we're joined today from Randolph County from some of our friends from the Northern West Virginia Center for Independent Living. If you guys will please stand as I call your name. Willis McCollum, Brenda Dasher, and Ryan Poling. If the House would please make them welcome.
Lady in the 65th, Douglas Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the West Gallery, we have a special guest, and I'm always proud when folks from the Eastern Panhandle make it out to the People's Capital, but this one in particular is very special. Storm is a mom of 4, 2 of which are fostered and now adopted. She's a beloved teacher at Charlestown Middle School, a union sister who I was absolutely proud to stand side by side with as we were on strike on the picket line. And if that wasn't inspiring enough, she's now filed as a Democratic candidate for this body. I'd like to welcome Storm Frame to the arena, but also to the People's House.
The gentleman in the 5th, Douglas Pethel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. Today I have a volunteer here with AARP in the South Gallery, Mr. Philip Johnston from Hayden City. If he'd please stand and the House make him welcome. Thank you.
Are there further introductions? If not, further consideration of bills on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4077, increasing the amount of the bond required to be posted by proprietary schools.
Is there objection to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read? Chair hears no objection. The gentleman, the 27th, Douglas Ellington, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under current law, proprietary schools, which are your correspondence, business, occupational, trade schools, may not operate in West Virginia without a permit, and any application for a permit must be accompanied by a $35,000 surety bond. Now, this committee substitute increases the bond to an amount not less than $50,000 and not more than $100,000. It also adds language to ensure that the bond is penal in nature, and it also strengthens the process to protect the state's interest. The period of liability for the bond coverage begins with the permit issuance and continues for the full term of the permit and any renewals thereof. The council is required to release the bond when it determines that the conditions of the bond have been fully performed. At that time, any cash or collateral securities deposited by the school shall be returned. The committee substitute also expands the types of bonding that may be accepted. The form of the bond shall be approved by the chancellor and may include surety bonding, collateral bonding, establishment of an escrow account, submission of a letter of credit, or any combination of the above. The types of collateral bonding are also set forth. They can be either cash deposits, securities, or certificates, and they must be equal to or more than the penal bond, and they also must be placed in trust with the state treasurer. In addition, with approval of the chancellor, the school may receive the whole or any portion of the cash, securities, or certificates deposited in exchange for the school depositing other cash, securities, or certificates equal to or greater to the sum of the bond. Now, the committee substitute removes language that would allow a proprietary school to cancel a bond and instead allows the school to be released upon 30 days' notice. It also adds language to code to ensure that if a proprietary school is no longer covered by surety bond or other collateral, the council shall, upon 10 days' notice, suspend the school's permit until the school is once again in compliance with the statutory provisions. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? The gentleman, the 60th, Douglas Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman please yield?
Yes, Chairman,
Yes,
does
sir.
yield.
Sir, if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask 2 questions, and I'll sit down and wait for your answer.
That would be fine.
Question number 1 is, what is the purpose behind the bond? And the second question is, what's the purpose behind the increase in the bond amount? Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The purpose of the bond is to protect the state and that expenses that if a school fails or they just happen to leave, like a fly-by-night type school, that it covers the state as far as any purposes for taking care of that. Sometimes they have to get credits for students to be transferred to finish up their training, that type of thing. And current at $35,000, we've had a couple that have failed in the past few years that left students. They wanted to increase that to cover the cost, and it matches up with other states. And that's why the $50,000 to $100,000 is the limit.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, then the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 99 ayes, 0 nay, 1 member absent not voting. Majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4077.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title is read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4119, establishing the crime of torture.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read? The chair hears no objection. The gentleman from the 29th, Delegate Steele, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before you have today House Bill 4119, defining the crime of torture. It is creating a new crime in our code. Torture is defined as when a person intends to cause cruel or extreme physical or mental pain and suffering, inflicts serious bodily injury or severe pain or suffering upon another person within his or her custody or physical control. The bill goes on to define related terms such as custody or physical control being the forcible restriction of a person's movements or forcible confinement of the person so as to interfere with that person's liberty without that person's consent or without lawful authority. Serious bodily injury is defined as bodily injury that creates a substantial risk of death, which causes prolonged disfigurement, impairment of health, or loss or impairment of the bodily function of any bodily organ, or bodily injury that creates one or more of the following conditions: serious impairment of a bodily function with substantial physical pain, permanent impairment of physical condition, internal injury, poisoning, deprivation of water and food, serious burns or scalding, or severe cuts, fractures, or life-threatening or multiple puncture wounds. There's also a component that defines severe mental pain or suffering as a mental injury that results in substantial alteration of mental functioning that is manifested in a visibly demonstrable manner caused by or resulting from any of the following: the intentional infliction or threatened infliction of great bodily injury. B, the administration or application or threatened administration or application of mind-altering substances or other procedures calculated to disrupt the senses or personality. The threat of imminent death, or the threat that another person will imminently be subjected to death, great bodily injury, or the administration or application of mind-altering substances or other procedures calculated to disrupt the senses or personality. It is important to note that proof of pain is not an element of the crime, and a conviction for torture does not preclude conviction for any other offense arising from the same transaction. And the penalty for the commission of this crime is a determinate sentence of not less than 15 years. Mr. Speaker, that's the bill. And I urge its passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are the members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? The gentleman from the 60th, Delegate Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman please yield?
Sure.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so assault, attempted murder, battery, abuse are all illegal at this time, right?
That's correct.
What's the call for this bill then?
Well, this bill really originated, I guess, there's a couple instances, from my career and talking to other prosecutors around the state, that you have a crime that rises to the level of, I'll give you an example of one that I dealt with, was a child that was strapped to a chair, kept in a closet for a very, very prolonged period. She was low functioning mentally. And the parent tortured her by forcing her to eat pickles for a period of years, burning her with cigarettes, a number of things. When she was found at 13 years old, she weighed 38 pounds. And when we went to prosecute that crime, the only thing that the parent could be charged with was child abuse, carried a 1 to 5. And the public felt, and we all felt, that that was a woefully inadequate sentence given what happened. And I think if you look at what's described in this bill, you're going far beyond a standard battery or a standard assault. You're really dealing with a sadistic situation. And that's actually one of the elements of this, is to cause cruel or extreme physical pain and suffering. And that's also defined in the bill, the inhumanity of it. And we we developed this. Believe it or not, there's not a lot of states that have this. There's only about 3 states that have a torture statute, one of them being Michigan. We looked at California, Alabama, and Michigan. And Michigan lined up with a lot of the goals that we had in drafting the bill, and they had a well-developed body of case law. So the nice thing about this bill is it does track Michigan a lot, so that if this statute comes up in a court case, there will be a body of secondary sources that attorneys can utilize in helping interpret that statute. Now, of course, Michigan law is not controlling, but it is helpful for an attorney to kind of have this to say, hey, here's how this worked out in another jurisdiction, and that helps a court. But you're really here, we're trying to pinpoint those, and as I've looked at it, maybe 1 or 2 cases in a jurisdiction a year that come up. We just had one in Fayette County where a child was starved to death, that our laws aren't adequate to deal with that, and that's what we're seeking out.
Yes, sir. Just to make sure I understand, here's the way I'm seeing it. So we have a situation where, generally speaking, someone's in a custodial or protective role. In other words, the person who's supposed to protect this person from this sort of injury and is actually causing it intentionally, likely over a long period of time, usually with some sort of malice.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now it's important to note that this would also apply in those situations where possibly someone's abducted by a stranger and then tortured. That would play out there as well.
And normally that would be prosecuted under abuse, but abuse just doesn't reach far enough.
It doesn't really arise to the level. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, the 55th, Douglas Spinagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, I've been down here, this is my 8th year. And when I first got here, Governor Earl Ray Tomlin, we had a prison crisis, and we did the Justice Reinvestment Act. And we reduced that because we were going to have to spend $200 million to build a prison. Then over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, we disregarded that, and we started stacking up penalties after penalties after penalties, new crimes after new crimes, duplication crimes. Now, I understand my friend from Raleigh County, but I'm just sitting here, just pulled up 61.2, Chapter 61.2. You could charge them with malicious or unlawful assault, that's 2 to 10. Assault during the commission of or attempt to commit a felony, that's 2 to 10. Kidnapping, 10 to 25 years. Abduction of a person, 25 years. And there's others down through here. Has anyone ever looked, when we're up in judiciary, and just looked at the crimes that we have on the books? And I'm asking that because it's not a political party issue. It's systemic to the legislature. Common law, you only had 5 felonies. Common law, which was the rule of the land for hundreds of years, whether in England and the United States. Burglary, arson, rape, kidnapping, murder. Now you can pretty much fit any criminal offense into one of those categories. And then when we're up in judiciary and we're sitting here trying to make determinations of what should these penalties be, do we have, or even down here on the floor, do we have a chart that says, all right, these are all the crimes that we have on the books for property. These are the sentences that we have. Where should this fit into? These are all the crimes that we have for people. Here's the sentencings. Murder one without mercy all the way down to, I don't know, let's say petty jaywalking. Do we have that? No, I know what we do. We sit around the table. Someone says, well, I think 1 to 5 sounds good. 2 to 10. Hell, let's do 3 to 15. And we come down here, and that's what we pass out. And then it goes on the books. Now, I applaud the chairman of judiciary, from the my friend from the 27th. This year during Issues and Eggs, he got up and started talking about the various criminal prison reform that we're going to have. We started the Sentencing Commission. That was one of the first bills we passed, House Bill 4004, because we don't want to spend $200 million to build another prison. Guys, and I don't know if everyone here remembers or not, when we gave those pay raises to the regional jail and Department of Corrections, we put a moratorium that's going to be lifted next year. County commissions pay $49.25, $49.50. As a result of that pay raise, the actual going rate should be around $52.50, $53. That comes off next year. And that's hoping that you're not going to have a budget deficit, which looks very likely right now, of at least $200 million. And then you add on the effect that we're at 25% overcrowding. We're going to build another prison for $200 million. All right, there's $400 million hole. I'm not going to be here, so I'm not worried about it. You all can worry about all those situations. But to me, it's like we're bipolar because we understand this concern. We're trying to do bail bond reform. We're trying to do parole. We're trying to get them out of regional jail. And here we are passing criminal laws that are the same things on the books, not once, not twice, not three, not four. Now we're up to 5 times. And it's easy. You come down here and say, well, I'm going to vote, be hard on crime. I'm going to go back home and say I passed torture. But all you're doing is causing a bigger budget hole in the state, and you're really not doing anything. You're just running concurrent. So at some point in time, you got to say, you know what, we're going to use some logic, we're going to use some common sense, which is hopefully what the Sentencing Commission is going to do, and we're going to stop this nonsense. Now, I'm under no illusion it's going to pass, everyone's going to hit the green button and say, I'm not going to vote against torture. But at some point in time, the body's going to have to stop. I looked down here on the reading of the bills. First reading, we got 2 more felonies coming up. Why don't we put a moratorium on all these felonies and wait till the Sentencing Commission comes back and makes recommendations? I mean, can anybody in here even tell me how many criminal laws that we have on the books? Anybody? I don't. We pass about a dozen out every year. Usually a special set of facts. Someone comes out here and holds up this opinion, which is already covered somewhere else, and we pass another law out. So for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to be voting no.
Does the gentleman from the 23rd, Douglas Steele, wish to close debate on the bill? Gentleman is recognized to close debate on the bill.
As I discussed earlier with the gentleman from the 60th, this does seek to take care of situations that are above the level of what a simple malicious wounding would be or what a simple assault would be. Because right now you have victims of torture who are scarred for the rest of their life that you had a conviction 2 years ago and the perpetrator is now walking the streets again. And they shouldn't be. And what this bill seeks to address is a tiny portion of those where you have cruel, inhumane, and sadistic conduct. And I mean, if you agree with the gentleman from the 55th, sure. If 2 years is enough for someone that tortured a child for a period of 13 years by burning them with cigarettes, by force-feeding them pickles, by making them watch their siblings eat Happy Meals while they were doing it, vote with him. It'll be fun. It'll be fun. You can vote against those kids who were tortured. You can vote against those people who get tortured and are scarred and maimed for life. I'm glad to know we know his position on this. But as for me, and I hope everyone else in here, I hope we vote green. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 94 ayes, 5 nays, 1 member absent, not voting. Majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4119.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title is read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action to the House, to the Senate, and request concurrence therein. For what purpose does the lady from the 3rd, Douglas Stewart, seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to return to the second order of business for purpose of introduction.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Lady can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, my glasses got the better of my eyes. I would like to introduce from the 1st Congressional District and a former member of this body, our Congressman David B. McKinley.
Next bill on 3rd reading.
House Bill 4417, relating to permitting professional boards.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read? Chair hears no objections. The gentleman, the 17th, Douglas Rohrbach, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before us, the next 2 bills are bills that were brought to our attention from the Board of Pharmacy. The first that's before us now is House Bill 4417. This is a simple bill that permits each healthcare board to determine what continuing education classes should count towards their drug diversion education requirement. All this is permissive, so it would, if the Board of Medicine wants to do something a little bit different than the Board of Pharmacy, they're allowed to do it. And now it's a fairly prescriptive bill. So this is all it requires, and it was, again, a bill that the Board of Pharmacy urges us to consider, and I urge passage.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 98 ayes, 0 nays, 2 members absent, not voting. Majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
House Bill 4417.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title is read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. The next bill on third reading.
House Bill 4419, relating to the Controlled Substance Monitoring Database.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read? Chair hears no objection. The gentleman of the 17th, Doug Rohrbach, to explain the bill.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. The second bill that the Board of Pharmacy would like us to consider is a bill that requires pharmacists to check the Controlled Substance Monitoring Database. This change was recommended by the Board of Pharmacy's committee that deals with the Controlled Substance Monitoring Database Advisory Board. I would urge passage of the bill.
The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? The gentleman of the 35th, Doug Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Gladly.
The gentleman does yield.
On line 22 of the bill, it states that shall be documented in the patient's medical record maintained by a private prescriber or any inpatient facility. Reading the first part of the bill, a pharmacy would not be a private prescriber. They are a private dispensary, correct?
That would be correct.
So why are we excluding the if we're adding the pharmacists to this bill, why are we excluding them to document the patient's medical record saying that they accessed the database? Was that intentional, or was that accidentally left out? Because my whole thought is this purpose of this bill is to give them access to the database. Well, they should then be noting in the patient's medical record that they accessed the database.
Well, it's actually, when we got testimony from the Board of Pharmacy, most electronic pharmacy systems are already accessing this. So it's kind of plugged in.
Yeah, but this says that it'll be documented in the patient's medical record.
Yeah, and the other thing is under HIPAA laws, the private prescriber is not going to have access to the medical record.
You said
the pharmacist. I'm sorry, I said private.
Yeah,
prescriber.
you said private prescriber.
Yeah,
I'm just talking about the pharmacy.
Right, they're not going to have access under HIPAA to the patient's medical record, but they can, under our controlled substance database, have access to that.
But then, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But then they should. That's why I'm asking: is shouldn't they be noting it in the patient's file in the pharmacy that they accessed it, just like these other entities are required to?
My understanding from the Board of Pharmacy is it's already kind of linked in through their electronic system when they fill the prescription.
That it's noted in the file? Let's see. I think they left that out.
Well, to the gentleman, I believe that the access point here to the pharmacy is through the Controlled Substance Monitoring Program. So they're really, what we're looking for is for them to access that and see if there's a problem. And then if there is a problem, the PDMP will show the problem to the pharmacist. So as far as to make a notation, the electronic system it's just like when I use the EHR in my office. That's documented. Every click I make is documented in the patient's record. So the pharmacy's prescription program, when they fill it, it's part of it. It shows that they clicked and they checked that. It's just kind of automatically done like your EHR. If I would access your chart in my office, every click I made and every page I looked at's documented.
So you're in your practice, you document that you access it, you don't document if there's a problem.
Correct. I have to access it. That's state law.
So then, do you think that the way it's written here, that the pharmacy has to document it as well, that they accessed it?
Well, yes, because it's in their system. It's automatically in their EHR. They said that the testimony from the Director Goff was that it's just right there, and they click on it. So when they fill your prescription, they open up a chart, so to speak, and then they click on that, and that shows that they access the controlled substance monitoring database, and then that notation is made. So every click they're going to make, that's monitored in that chart, and it's there in perpetuity.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 97 ayes, 2 nays, 1 member absent not voting. A majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. Clerk will please report the title.
House Bill 4419.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, then the title is read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the acts of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Are there further bills on third reading? If not, bills on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4058 relating to pharmacy benefit managers.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4275 authorizing Department of Military Affairs and Public Safety promulgate legislative rules.
Are there amendments?
Delegates Fleischauer and Westphal move to amend the bill on page 1, section 1, line 8, following the word authorized by striking out the period and inserting a colon and the following, with the following amendment. On page 4, section 4 of the rule by striking out the provisions of 4.1.k.1 in its entirety.
The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just read by the clerk. Are there members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? The lady from the 51st, Dr. Fleischauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are there further amendments?
Are there further amendments? There are no further amendments.
Okay. Well, I hope you'll indulge me. I have had an education about AFCI's arc fault circuit interrupters, which I now can say, that can flow out of my mouth a little bit, and I would like to educate the rest of you what I've learned. Basically, first I want to start out with a history. We have something called the National Electric Code, and that is a standard that is adopted by consensus, and it includes all sorts of groups: architects, insurance companies, electricians, and home builders. They're all part of this, and they update it every couple of years. So in West Virginia, arc fault circuit interrupters are a safety protection that we have had since 2002 in our state. We adopted the 1999 National Electric Code, or the NEC, and at that point in time we had them in bedrooms. And then we upgraded in 2014, we adopted the 2011 standards, and we added the requirements so that it would apply to family rooms, dining rooms, living rooms, parlors, libraries, dens, bedrooms, sunrooms, rec rooms, closets, hallways, and similar areas. So that's most rooms in the house, but not basements, garages, and stuff like that. That rule also said that if you're going to modify or replace your electrical system back in 2014, then you needed to upgrade to the AFCI. So what's an AFCI? An AFCI stops
an electrical arc that can be created if you have, say, a nail and you're running your vacuum cleaner and this arc goes, and if that nail is behind the plaster or a staple where some kind of wire has been stapled, you will not see that. You will not see that maybe a potential safety hazard in your home has been caused by one of these arcs. It can be created by kitchen appliances, and you wouldn't even know it. So we have had these now in our country for about 20 years, and they have been improved constantly. When they first started, they would trip, and now they have these intelligent AFCIs that will tell you what it was that caused the arc. Since 2014, or let me make sure I have this correct. Deadly electrical fires have gone down by 14%. 14% since AFCIs has been required. Now, we can't be sure that it was the AFCI that was the cause of this, but we don't know. It's sort of like, how do you prove a negative? How do you prove that a fire would have resulted if a kitchen appliance caused an arc that turned the power off? But this has saved lives in the United States, and I don't think, would ever want to test that theory. And that's what the proposed rules would do, is to take away the requirement for these arc circuit interrupters for all rooms in the home except bedrooms. Okay. Now, one thing I just want to add to this is that this is much more important in older homes than in newer homes. 85% of electrical fires are caused in older homes. So the replacement requirement is very important, and the updating requirement. I just realized that my home, which was redone in 1991, doesn't have these AFCIs. I never even heard of an AFCI. And we had testimony from a gentleman who used to be in the general counsel's office that his wife was running their vacuum cleaner and the AFCI kept tripping and turning the electricity off. He has 3 little girls. They spend most of their time in their family rooms. And this protection could have saved their lives. It could have stopped, and probably did stop, a deadly electrical fire. We heard testimony from 3 times, because this was taken up before rulemaking review, it was taken up in judiciary, and it was taken up in the public hearing on Monday. And so we had people come from all over the state on their own dime, electricians, who told us, do not make this change. This is going backwards. They didn't have to. They came 3 times from Fairmont, from Wheeling, from Weirton, from Morgantown. These are electrical inspectors that said, do not make this. We don't want to go backwards. Also, and I guess I made it clear that there's very little, like a staple or a nail, that can cause one of these arcs. Now, So why would we be doing this? Why would we make this change? And one of the arguments is cost. Now, these AFCIs cost $35 each, approximately. The most it would cost in a home is, say, about $200. That was what the testimony showed. So I don't understand this. Do you think a $200,000 home, that the price is going to be reduced by $200 if this requirement is continued? And I want to make clear that this is the requirement now, and it has been for 6 years, and it started back in 2002. Do you think that saving is going to be passed on by the consumers? Why is this being done? We would be the only state in the whole country to roll back these safety protections. There are only 4 other states who have not kept up with the National Electric Code. And this would, as I said, this would take us back to 2002. We are considered a leader in safety in West Virginia, and this would be unprecedented. It would take us backwards. So let's not make West Virginia the leader in unsafe homes at risk for electrical fires. Let's keep our safety protections in our fire code to be sure that we prevent electrical fires before they start. And so I hope you will join me and the delegate from the 12th in adopting this amendment and bringing us back to where we are right now in our electrical protections.
The gentleman, the 15th, Dr. Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm opposed to this amendment. We worked on this very long time in rules, and we came out with this compromise with the basically through us. The Rules Committee suggested to go to none, to no AFCIs required in the House because of the increased cost to our constituents. And what came out of the committee after 2 meetings and 4.5 hours of discussion is the bedrooms only. And other states have done the bedrooms only as well. We aren't the only one that would do bedrooms only. The problem with these AFCIs is it can't, as the gentlelady stated, it can't be proven that these will protect lives, save lives, and prevent fires. But on top of that, the lady from the 51st mentioned testimony of a arc fault trip that would have that was given to us in testimony. But the problem is she didn't mention that the gentleman also said it was due to an overloaded circuit, an overloaded outlet, which is exactly what a circuit breaker does, would trip anyway. It didn't have to be an arc fault to trip in this case, because an arc fault deals with just the frequency that's on the wire. A regular circuit breaker, to kind of simplify it, a regular circuit breaker does the same thing, only an arc fault is at a lower threshold. The statement was that $200 on a new home. That may be correct depending on the number of circuit breakers, but the actual cost increase is from $9, around $9 for a circuit breaker to around $39 for one of these arc fault circuit breakers, or from $1.99 for an outlet to $2.99 for an outlet that's protected by AFCI. But the issue here is when you start looking at the $200 difference, let's say you decided that you wanted to change the color of your outlets. The problem there is you have to then protect every outlet with AFCI. So an electrician's going to come in, and let's say you did it. Let's say you had a circuit box. Well, you could pull out all the breakers in the box and switch it. But let's say your circuit box, your breaker box was old enough that it couldn't handle those. Well, and you wanted to switch the outlets. Well, you'd have to put it on the first branch of every line on that, an AFCI protection on the first branch of every line. So not only is it going to increase by 4-fold for the price of the outlet, but also you're going to have to pay the electrician to open every single outlet in order to find which one's the first branch in the line, which that price is around $90 a piece. So you'll be paying $90 for your labor. Instead of just changing it out for $1.99 for an outlet, you went from $1.99 plus the labor to probably the possibility of $800 to change one or two outlets and change the color of 1 or 2 outlets. Then you look at then you go on to, excuse me, but the cost difference, when you talk about electrical manufacturers, you talk about the cost difference of electrical manufacturers are making these and charging you, basically you're charging $40 more. Well, my constituency, I don't think that it's fair based on studies that don't prove that, hey, these are something that should be required. We're taking money from our constituents by increasing the cost of these electrical fixtures and taking that cost up so that we can put money in the pockets of large corporations, in my opinion, that are making these outlets. And most of the testimony that we heard was from the manufacturers of these electrical outlets saying, hey, you need to require these everywhere. Well, they're the ones that are making the outlets. Of course, I believe that they would want them required everywhere. And from my perspective, I think that our constituents deserve the lower cost, and I don't think we should raise the cost to our constituents just based on a theory. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, the 12th, Doug Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This did come through judiciary last week, and I'm a member of judiciary, and it's not that we don't talk about it. We tend to talk about in judiciary a lot about everything, it seems like. So, but we talked about it, and there was a roll call, and I voted no against it. I said no, but I was still hesitant about it. So over the weekend, I've talked to a few people about this and got a little bit more educated. That's why I'm on this amendment. So to me, it's not a dollar and cent thing, it's a safety thing. If you've ever stood with somebody after their house was burnt, which I have, I don't care if it's $300 for a new home or $2,000 for a remodel, they would be more than glad to pay that amount. When you lose everything, your pictures and everything, it's not a dollar and cent thing to me, it's a safety issue. I understand about, replacing your outlets, it could cost a whole lot more. But again, to me, it's just a safety issue. I think we should do everything possible to ensure the safety of the citizens of West Virginia, and I think there's one thing we can do. So for that reason, my vote is different than it was last week. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman, the 53rd, Delegate Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this amendment. The reason, whenever you look at a breaker, what a breaker does, you size that to the wire that you use. A 12 wire, it can handle a 20 amp breaker. And the gentleman that, the delegate mentioned, that said that if he hadn't had a arc fault that he wouldn't have known. Whenever you overload that, that's what a breaker does. He overloaded the circuit, so they put 2 circuits in, and he didn't have any more trouble. An arc fault has no bearing on your load. The only thing an arc fault does is does everybody know what an oscilloscope is? And if you looked at an oscilloscope, you would see going across. Electricity, they want it to be in a good, even waveform. As you go across that, the arc fault reads a spike. If there's any kind of a spike, like whenever you plug something in, if you have a sweeper that's turned on and you plug it in, you'll see that little spark right there as you plug it into the receptacle. That'll blow your arc fault. And that's why it's more of a nuisance. It doesn't really protect the wire. You mentioned that if there was a nail in the wire, that's what your regular breaker is for. That if there's a nail in the wire, it will blow that breaker bang right now. And that's what it's for. The arc fault, the only thing originally what they told us when we originally started putting them in, and that's the reason why I went in the bedrooms, it was about the length that was in the bedroom. And whenever you created that arc there, it could start a fire. Each box that you put a receptacle in is fire rated. It is to handle so many fire burn inside that box. Those little boxes on your wall, those are fire rated so that it'll handle that if there's an arc inside the box. And if there is, it blows the regular breaker. Now, I don't know where he got his prices for breakers, but regular breakers are about $3.50, and arc faults are anywhere from $30, depends on how many you buy, to $50. Depends on which manufacturer you get them from. And whatever box you have in your house determines which manufacturer is warranted to put those breakers in. So if you've got a Simmons or if you've got a Square D box, it's a different price for each one of those. It's not just a regular price. Some of them charge more, some less. But the real cost, and in new construction, what we found, you run more circuits so you don't overload anything. And that's where in the last 20 years the fire ratings went down, is because we've ran more circuits instead of running one circuit to take 2 or 3 bedrooms, and then they plug 4 or 5 things in, it starts drawing on it, and then we have trouble with the wire. You have maybe 1 or 2 circuits in a bedroom, and then you don't have any of these problems. The real cost, though, is in remodeling. And in remodeling, whenever you start to remodel and you have to change it all to code, that means you have to put all these arc faults in. Well, a lot of times that will increase the cost. Maybe there's a wire that won't handle. If it depends on how old it is. Some of the old wires didn't have ground, it has a black wire and a white wire, and it didn't have a ground wire. Well, you can't put an arc fault in that, so now you've got to run a new wire. And the reason why electricians and stuff want to do this is because everything's paid on percentage. And everybody knows 10% of $100 is $10. 10% of $20, because that's what the cost is, $20. So you raise your net value by raising that. That's the reason why they want to push these. It hasn't been proven that they really save any buildings or anything yet. And we're not stepping back. What we're doing is correcting the overreach that's been all these. They keep on passing more rules and more rules, and they underline, well, this is for the safety of the public. Well, if the public can't afford to do it, so they try to skirt around it because these are the new rules, we're not helping anybody. We are creating a bigger problem. And this is just an expense that we don't need to add to people. We haven't proved that it really helps them yet. And now the GFCI, that's the ground fault breaker, completely different story. I'd back those where we use those. But when these arc faults first came out, they told us to put them in refrigerators, put them there. Well, it didn't take very long. They said you can't because there's a motor in there. A motor will spike, and when that spikes, it'll click the breaker. You're on vacation, you come back, everything in your refrigerator's ruined. So, okay, we don't have to put them there. They don't put them in the kitchens because of the same thing. You plug in a toaster or a mixer, it'll blow the breaker. So they said, okay, you don't need to put them in the kitchens. And I don't see where we need to really force someone to use these. All someone has to do is say, when you build a new house, I would like to have arc faults in my house. Not a problem. You want to pay for it? We can put them in. But forcing someone to have to use them when it's not really proven that it's that good of a safety issue, and I'm against the amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman, the second, Doug Desario.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't quite know where to start with all of this because all of a sudden we seem to have a whole bunch of electricians in here that know about oscilloscopes and all kind of things, but I'd like to tell you that I've been an electrician for the last 40 years. And what you've heard today is really out there. I don't know how often you change your receptacles, the color of them, but if you want to change the color of them all the time, you put a GF, or you put a breaker in that takes care of it. It follows down the line. And for someone to say that we don't have to have ground fault circuit interrupters in a kitchen, you need to read the code. All right? Now, for someone to come out and say that electricians want to do this to make money is just bitter craziness. This has been introduced by the National Electrical Code. It follows NFP 70 guidelines. This is for the safety of our citizens. The delegate over here spoke a little while ago that circuits get broken because we overload them. And now, over the last few years, we don't overload them as much. You know why? Because the code came out and guided us on what we should do. For making money in the color as opposed to the safety of our citizens, I don't think anybody in here knows nearly as much as the people that sit and write the National Electrical Code. For us to sit in here and think we're smarter or we can make things safer by saying that electricians are doing this to make money or that we're going to save our constituents a couple dollars is ludicrous to me. I agree that the majority of these problems start in older homes. I agree with the gentleman that says you're going to come into situations where you only have 2 wires. You know what you need to do when you come into that situation? You need to replace the wire because you're not protected by a ground. And I'm not talking about an arc flash. I'm not talking about a ground fault interrupter, which, if you know, one interrupts on the hot side, one interrupts on the neutral side. So there's a little bit more to know about this than everyone seems to think they know. And that's why I will stand today for the safety of the citizens of West Virginia, and I back this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman of the 63rd, Doug Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is just one more great thing about having a citizens legislature, that we can all have our experts and everyone can have their own fields they work in and get up and speak to this. So I've been a general contractor for the past 25 years. I've grown up in a contracting family, both residential and commercial. So I've been around this all my life, and it's something that I do know a good bit about. And I would rise in opposition to this amendment this morning. I agree with my friend from the 53rd, who's a master electrician and has had many years working in this field as I have. These arc fault interrupters, when they were first brought out, we were kind of confused exactly what they were going to do. To me, it's just another gadget that the manufacturers have come up with, because they're always trying to come up with something new that they can put into the code that they say you have to have, that's going to save you, that's going to save everything. I can tell you that the GFIs, I agree with those. Those are a super sensitive circuit that you need in your kitchens and bathrooms where water's present. The arc fault interrupters, I have never seen any proof where they work, how they work. We've tried to make them trip before. They're a very tough breaker to trip. They have to be replaced every 5 years. We haven't talked about the cost of that. Another thing I'd like to bring up is we've talked a lot about new homes. What about we talk about remodels? So let's say you want to put a new bathroom in your house and you're willing to spend $4,000 or $5,000 to put a new bathroom in your house, and we're going to upgrade to meet code, and we're going to put GFIs in your bathrooms. But now all of a sudden they said, well, we're going to bring your house up to code. You got to put your arc faults in. Well, you have an older box. Okay, so right now everyone's using like Homeline Square D. But you have an older home and you've got like an American Pacific box or one of the older manufacturers that you can't get parts for anymore. Well, guess what? They don't make arc faults for those boxes. So now you've went to a complete service upgrade. So now your $6,000 or $7,000 bathroom remodel is now $10,000 or $11,000 because you're doing a complete upgrade of your panel box. So to me, this is not a direction that we need to go in. To me, this is just industry trying to push their products. They're trying to sell us things that they think that we need. And listen, if our homeowners think they need them, they're more than welcome to go out and purchase them for about $49 to $55 a piece, depending on the size of the circuit and the size of the wire that you're using, and have an electrician install them. But I do not believe that we need to dictate to our homeowners and to our contractors what they need to be doing. So thank you very much, and I rise in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman, the 22nd, Doug Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentlelady yield for a question?
Yes.
Yeah, my question is very simple. We have a lot of folks in the state of West Virginia that have mobile homes and buy mobile homes. When they manufacture the mobile homes, does this certain outlet have to be produced in the mobile home for it to be?
Well, let me tell you that these requirements have been in effect in West Virginia for the past 6 years. And I assume that any new home, including mobile homes, this would apply. So this is not a cost increase. This has already been in existence for 6 years, and nobody, as far as I know, has complained about it. No one has ever said to me that the cost of my home went up a little bit because of this new requirement that happened 6 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Do either of the sponsors wish to close debate on the amendment? The lady in the 51st to close debate.
So I want to respond to a couple of things. One of the gentlemen who spoke said these only last 5 years. And I have a letter from the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission from 2003. And in that letter, they say that the CPSCs, the Consumer Product Safety Commission staff, estimate the current technology AFCIs may remain in service for 40 years or more. These do not have to be replaced every 5 years. They also said in this report that they analyzed the aggregate cost and benefit. And we are talking about the difference between people losing their lives in a horrible fire and a little bit more that everyone has already been paying on the cost of a home. And their estimate was the total cost of the addition would be $175 per housing unit, and that's including in renovations. And they basically said in this report that the benefit exceeds the cost. And that's, I think, what we need to think about is what are we balancing here? We are balancing the safety of West Virginians versus going backwards on the safety protection. And Mr. Speaker, I think this is one of the most important issues we are going to face this session. Are we going forward in West Virginia, or are we going backwards? And I urge you all to put the safety of West Virginians first. I don't want one of my constituents to burn up in a fire because this safety protection wasn't included because somebody wanted to save a couple of extra bucks. I don't want them to lose all their pictures. And the average amount of time, let me add one more little fact, the average amount of time to escape from a home has decreased. And that is because of the different materials that are being used in homes that burst into flames more quickly. I don't know about the rest of you, but I live pretty far from fire departments. I live in the middle of 40 acres. I live way out. And so I'm probably not going to be in that average 3 minutes. And if you don't know that a fire has started in your home because it's behind the wall, and I realized I need to get mine updated. I thought, my home was completely redone in 1991. I'm going to check it out and talk to my electrician. But I think for new homes and for remodeling, this is really important that we put West Virginians first. The safety of West Virginians have to come first. And I strongly urge the adoption of this amendment. And I'd like a roll call, Mr. Speaker.
Roll call has been demanded. Demand is sustained. The question before the House is the adoption of the amendment as just explained by the lady from the 51st and the gentleman from the 12th. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result of this question. There are 40 ayes, 58 nays, 2 members absent, not voting, less than a majority having voted in favor. The chair declares the amendment lost. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced to third reading. Are there further bills on second reading? If not, bills on first reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 94, providing persons with physical disabilities to vote by electronic absentee ballot.
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4002, creating a felony crime relating to drug delivery resulting in death.
Bill will be advanced.
House Bill 4393, relating to making suffocation and asphyxiation crimes.
The bill will be advanced. Are there further bills on first reading? If not, leaves of absence. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so happy that I'm not asking for a leave for the gentleman from the 36th, but I am asking for our colleague, Delegate Boggs.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objection. A leave shall be granted. Remarks by members of the House. The gentleman from the 61st, Delegate Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, like many of you, I watched the Today Show segment on the opioid and foster care crisis. The most heartbreaking thing that I've seen in a long time. And quite frankly, I don't know how any of us could watch that without getting choked up. We were introduced to a foster care family, Monica and Robert Kinder, who have fostered over 20 children in the past 6 years, providing stable, safe, and loving homes to those children. And they, like so many other foster care families across this state, are angels among us. Over 7,000 children are currently in our foster care system in West Virginia. Over 2,800 of them with no in-state foster or adoptive home to go to. They're currently in emergency shelters, group homes, hospitals, transitional living, or out of state. House Bill 4092 has passed the Health Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and is now in the Finance Committee. In the Health Committee, it was amended by my friend and colleague from the 28th, Delegate Pack. That amendment provided the necessary increase to the daily rate per child that families receive, allowing more families to open their homes to these 2,800 foster children. It's been estimated that the cost of this bill is now roughly $16 million. Some here suggest that we can't afford it. Let me remind you in that Today Show segment that one child was asked prior to her being in a foster care home where she got food. Her answer was, they dug in a garbage can. Now, if anyone here thinks that we don't have $16 million to fund this bill, I want you to take the time to picture a West Virginia child digging in a garbage can for food. And then tell me, better yet, tell these children that we don't have $16 million. If it is the will of this body, the majority of this body believes that we don't have this necessary funds, then you need to reevaluate your priorities. In a small state of 1.8 million people, we have rainy day funds in excess of $800 million. $800 million, and our children are eating out of garbage cans. The proposed general revenue budget this year is approximately $4.6 billion, yet we have children eating out of garbage cans. Monica and Robert Foster have been living in a home with a leaking roof and a deteriorating ceiling because they choose to take care of children with the money that they have. They clearly have their priorities in line. They're taking care of children. Children that are not born to them, children that are our responsibility, and they're stepping up to the plate. It's time this House get its priorities in line. During the State of the State address, the governor reported there would be approximately $309 million in Medicaid surplus. He proposed some of that fill the budget gap, some of that to go to the IDD wait list, which is long overdue, and some of that, $150 million of that, to go into a lockbox, a Families First Fund. 2,800 children in our state don't even have families. Families First Fund. Mr. Speaker, we need to give these children a family first. In that Today Show segment, some of the girls changed their names when they got a new home. One to Serenity, one to Haven. When asked why she chose Haven, she said she knew this was a safe place. The first time in her life, she was in a stable, safe, and loving home. Mr. Speaker, we need to pass House Bill 4092 in its current form because we have 2,800 West Virginia children, just like Haven and Serenity, that need and deserve a safe place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there further remarks by members? If not, introduction to guests. The gentleman, the 22nd, Doug Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Introducing our Doctor of the Day, we have Andrew Pearson of Barboursville, West Virginia, if the House would make him welcome.
The gentleman, the 50th, Doug Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have an introduction, but I ask unanimous consent that my friend's remarks from the 61st be placed in the appendix of the journal.
Are there objections? Chair hears no objections. Miscellaneous business? If not, then lady from the 49th for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move subject to announcements that the House adjourn until 11 a.m. on Thursday.
The question before the House is lady's motion that subject to announcements, the House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. on tomorrow morning. Are there announcements? Lady from the 49th.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Rules will meet tomorrow morning at 10:45 behind the chamber.
The gentleman from the 10th, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Finance will meet today at 5 p.m. for a budget presentation by the Attorney General. Following the budget presentation, your Committee on Finance will meet to run rules bills. The agenda will be posted. Tomorrow, we will have 3 budget presentations, 8 a.m. for the Department of Veterans Assistance, 9 a.m. for the Department of Military Affairs, and 5 p.m. for the Department of Commerce. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman, the 35th, Doug Capito.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Committee on the Judiciary will meet today at 5 o'clock. The agenda for that meeting will be posted, and we will meet in the committee room, surprise. And tomorrow morning, we're going to meet at 9 a.m. in the committee room, and the agenda for that meeting will also be posted. Another announcement that the Tech Caucus will meet immediately following the floor session today in the McManus room, where food will be provided, and we will have a presentation from folks from Apple Inc. Thank you.
The gentleman, the 13th, Doug Higginbotham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Education will meet today at 5 o'clock in the Education Committee room. The agenda is posted. Also, the Democrat members of the committee will caucus with the chairman and I in his office at 4:15, and then Republican members at 4:35. We'll also be meeting tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Thank you.
The gentleman, the 46th, Doug Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Industry and Labor will meet today in the Judiciary Room at 1 p.m. The Republican members of the Industry and Labor will meet today at 12:45 in the Judiciary Chairman's office.
The gentleman, the 16th, Doug Mant.
Mr. Speaker, just a reminder, at 1 p.m., the Committee on Small Business, Entrepreneurship, and Economic Development will be meeting in the Government Organizational Room. Thank you.
The gentleman, the 15th, Doug Foster.
Thank you. Reminder of your subcommittee on House Bill 4006 will meet in the House Judiciary Room at 3 p.m. And the members of that subcommittee are Delegate from the 3rd, Delegate Fluharty, Delegate from the 48th, Delegate Waxman, Delegate from the 35th, Delegate Byrd, Delegate from the 35th, Delegate Capito, Delegate from the 65th, Delegate Brown S., the delegate from the 32nd, Delegate Kessinger.
Lady from the 32nd, Delegate Kessinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on the Prevention and Treatment of Substance Abuse will meet tomorrow at 1 p.m. in the Government Organization Committee room.
The gentleman, the 58th, Delegate Coles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Committee on Political Subdivisions will meet tomorrow at 1 p.m. in the House Judiciary Committee room.
The gentleman, the 17th, Dr. Rohrbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Senior, Children, and Families Issues will meet today at 3 p.m. in the Government Organization Committee room.
The gentleman, the first, Dr. Schwartzmiller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Labor Caucus will meet today in the Gov Org room immediately following session, and lunch will be provided. Thank you.
Are there further announcements? If not, the question before the House is a motion that the House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the motion adopted. The House is adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow.
Senate will please come to order. The Senate will please come to order. All those not having privileges of the floor will please vacate the chamber. And with those on the floor and our guests in the gallery, please rise as we are led in prayer this morning by Pastor Don Byram of the Emmanuel Baptist Church in Charleston, West Virginia. And then please remain standing as we are led in the pledge this morning by the senator from Boone County, Pastor Byram.
If you would join me in prayer. Almighty God, we thank you for the blessing of this day that you've given us, this opportunity to serve this state. Lord, we thank you for each one that's in this room, the families they represent. We pray for the senators as they would consider various bills and items that come before them. We pray for wisdom and discernment. We pray your blessing upon all the staff that work with them, that make each day possible. We thank you for their families that allow them the time to come and to serve our state. And Lord, we thank you that you have blessed this day. We ask for wisdom and guidance in each item that may be brought before them, and that you would give them discernment as they make decisions. May your blessing rest upon each one in this chamber this day. We pray in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. The senator from Boone County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the members of the body and our guests in the gallery please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Thank you. Reading of the journal.
West Virginia Legislature, Senate Journal, January 21st, 2020. The Senate met at 11:14
Senator from
a.m.
Raleigh County requests unanimous consent that further reading of the journal be dispensed with and that it be approved as having been read. Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Introduction of guests. On behalf of the Senate, it is my pleasure to welcome our honorary pages for the day. Please stand and be recognized when your name is called. As guest of the senior senator from the 8th, we have Carter Igoe, Jalen Fields, and Victoria Seibert. As guest of the senator from Wyoming County, Jada Thornsberry. As guest of the junior senator from the 8th, Renee Lawson. And as guest of the senator from Raleigh County, we have Jamie Crider. If they would all please rise in the Senate, give them a warm welcome. Thank you. You may be seated. Further introductions, the junior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Senate, it is your honor and mine to introduce our doctor for the day. The West Virginia Academy of Family Practice doctor of the day in the rear of the chamber is Dr. Andrew Pearson. If you wouldn't mind standing, let Senate give you a warm welcome.
Thank you. Further introductions, the senior senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the senators from the 2nd District and the 14th District, seated in the North Gallery is Brian Holmes. He's from Sistersville, West Virginia. He holds a Doctor of Pharmacy and received his degree from the University of Charleston. He is a passionate off-road enthusiast. In his spare time, he put together a series of routes in the eastern part of West Virginia to promote tourism and enable people to more easily explore and experience our beautiful state while contributing to local economies. He is driven by the desire to preserve and support small business and West Virginian culture for future generations to enjoy while doing what he and others love to do in this state and across the country, which is overlanding. His trail system is known as Infamous Adventure Routes, and it utilizes existing rural roads in West Virginia and has routes categorized based on difficulty that lead riders and drivers on a scenic overlanding adventure. Senate, please join me in making him welcome.
Further introduction, Senator from Boone County.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of everyone in here, we're very pleased to have fourth-year medical students from West Virginia University who are attending their 2-week health policy rotation. Included in the President's Gallery is Elizabeth Pacer, Nick Mason, Elizabeth Albuquerque, Doug Crate, and Alicia Monahan. If they would all stand in the Senate, make them welcome.
The senator from Upshur County.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the junior senator from Nicholas County and me, I would like to introduce some students from Nicholas County. And before I do that, these students are here at the invitation of the Secretary of State, and that the late Senator Jennings Randolph of West Virginia is considered the father of the 26th Amendment that reduced the voting age to 18. And I remember this distinctly because I was about 20 years old when that happened. But they asked the senator one day, they said, "What was your proudest moment?" And he said, "When I reduced the age to 18, when we voted for that." And they said, "Well, what was your saddest moment?" He said, "When I found out that 18-year-olds weren't exercising their right." But that's not the case in Nicholas County. Today, in the North Gallery with the Secretary of State, Mac Warner, are 3 high school seniors who have earned the title of Honorary Secretary of State for leading their student body to register 100% of their eligible students to vote. I'd like to ask each of today's special guests to stand as I read their name. J.C. Miller and Shade Rader of Richward High School in Nicholas County, and Gaela Villasener of Nicholas County High School in Nicholas County, and they are accompanied by their Nicholas County clerk, Bobby Planer. Would you please make them welcome?
Further introductions, Senator from Monongalia County.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on behalf of myself and the senator from Marion County, we have with us in the gallery to my left Emily Murphy, Chair of WVU Faculty Senate, Peggy Runyon, Chair of WVU Staff Council, Shirley Robinson, WVU Rep for the Advisory Council of Classified Staff, and Mike Torres, Vice Chair of WVU Staff Council. If they'll please rise and let the Senate make them welcome.
Junior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. On your behalf, I would like to introduce Dave Gilpin in the North Gallery up here. Dave's one of the people that in our communities around Putnam County, if you go to any event that is a community action event, you'll see Dave Gilpin there. You'll wonder if he's also in elected office. He's so involved. So I just wanted to say welcome to the Senate today, and thank you for being here. But the Senate make him welcome.
Senator from Raleigh County.
Thank you, Mr. President. The mother of our page, Jamie Kreider, is here today in the President's Gallery. Darlene Osborne, if you would please stand and the Senate give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. The Senator from Wyoming County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our page today for Wyoming County is Jada Thornsberry, and I'd like to introduce you to her mother, Tammy Osborne. Let's make her welcome, please.
There are further introductions. The Senior Senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. On your behalf and Senator from Kanawha, we have with us today some members from Emmanuel Baptist Church who are friends with our doorkeepers. Sitting up in the gallery, Jim and Joyce Downey, if they would stand and the Senate make them welcome.
Senator may continue.
Also, Mr. President, in the gallery today, we have the parents from 3 of our pages today. And I'd ask that they stand. Jennifer Piercy, Stephanie Clendenin, and Calvin Fields. If they would stand and the Senate make them welcome, please.
The Junior Senator from the 8th.
Yes, Mr. President, on your behalf and on behalf of the Senior Senator from the 8th, I'd like to acknowledge, and if they could stand, the father of one of our pages here from Nitro, Reese Lawson. The father's name is Mr. Joel Lawson. I believe he's in the President's Gallery. If the Senate can make him feel welcome. Thank you.
The Senator from Boone County.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Senator from Logan, we're very pleased to have from Boone County some honorary Secretary of State students, again, for registering at least 85% of their senior class to vote. They are Chloe Older, Haley Miller from Scott High School, Jacob Massey and Abby Bolton from Sherman High School, Kinsley White and Blake Martin from Van High School. If they would stand, the Senate make them welcome.
Further introductions. Communications from the House.
The Clerk of the House announced the passage by that body of committee substitute for House Bill 4017, establishing country roads accountability and transparency.
Message will be received and referred to Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4020, removing authority of municipalities to require occupational licensure if licensure for the occupation is required by the state.
Message will be received and referred to Committee on Government Organization with a second reference to the Committee on the Judiciary.
House Bill 4062, reducing the cost of prescription drugs.
Message will be received and referred to Committee on Banking and Insurance. Message will be received, House Message 4062, and referred to Committee on Health and Human Resources with a second reference to the Committee on Finance.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4108, relating generally to certificates of need for health care services.
Message will be received and referred to Committee on Health and Human Resources.
House Bill 4130, relating to competitive bidding for government construction contracts arising out of declared states of emergency.
Message will be received and referred to Committee on Government Organization.
House Bill 4141, requiring the Department of Administration to publish its comprehensive annual financial report by the end of December.
Message will be received and referred to Committee on Government Organization. Are there further communications from the House?
No, sir.
Are there communications from the Executive?
There are none.
Reports from standing committees.
Your Committee on Military has had under consideration Senate Bill 8, exempting certain armed forces veterans from payment of fees for license to carry deadly weapon, Senate Bill 114, providing continued eligibility for developmentally disability services to dependents of military members, Senate Bill 203, allowing certain deductions from personal income tax refunds, and Senate Bill 289, creating Green Alert Plan, and reports the same back with the recommendation that they each do pass, but under the original double committee references, first be referred to the Committee on Finance. Respectfully submitted, Ryan W. Weld, Chair.
Report will be received. A junior senator from the 4th.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to the second reference to the Committee on Finance for Senate Bill 8, Senate Bill 114, and Senate Bill 289 be dispensed. These bills are revenue neutral.
Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Senate Bill 203 will be referred to second reference to the Committee on Finance. Are there further reports from standing committees?
Yes, sir. Your Committee on Military has had under consideration Senate Bill 30, extending expiration of driver's licenses for active military members' spouses, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Respectfully submitted, Ryan W. Weld, Chair.
Report will be received. Under the bill's original double committee reference will be referred to Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure.
Your Committee on Health and Human Resources has had under consideration Senate Bill 77, establishing tax credit for certain physicians who locate to practice in West Virginia, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Finance. Respectfully submitted, Michael J. Maroney, Chair.
Report will be received and referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Natural Resources has had under consideration Senate Bill 160, creating voluntary WVU rifle team checkoff program on hunting and fishing licenses, and reports back a committee substitute for same, with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Finance. Respectfully submitted, Bill Hamilton, Chair.
Report will be received and referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure has had under consideration Senate Bill 171, exempting certain automobiles 25 years or older from personal property taxation, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Finance. Respectfully submitted, Chandler Swope, Chair.
Report will be received and referred to the Committee on Finance.
Your Committee on Education has had under consideration Senate Bill 303, enacting Students' Right to Know Act, and reports back a committee substitute for same, with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass. Respectfully submitted, Patricia Puertas Rucker, Chair.
Report will be received.
Your Committee on the Judiciary has had under consideration Senate Bills 357, 358, 359, 360, 361, 362, and 363, Insurance Commission rule relating to Medicare supplement insurance, and reports back a committee substitute for same, and Senate Bills 364, 365, 366, 367, and 368, DOH rule relating to use of state road rights-of-way, and reports back a committee substitute for same, with the recommendation that the two committee substitutes do pass. Respectfully submitted, Charles S. Trump IV, Chair.
Report will be received.
Your Committee on Natural Resources has had under consideration Senate Bill 468 relating to eligibility for license or permit application, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass. Respectfully submitted, Bill Hamilton, Chair.
Report will be received.
Your Committee on Natural Resources has had under consideration Senate Bill 469, increasing replacement costs for game and protected species, and reports back a committee substitute for same, with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary. Respectfully submitted, Bill Hamilton, Chair.
Report will be received and referred to the Committee on the Judiciary.
Your Committee on Natural Resources has had under consideration Senate Bill 470 relating to use of crossbow to hunt and reports back a committee substitute for same. Senate Bill 487 providing exception that all DNR payments be deposited within 24 hours and reports back a committee substitute for same. And Senate Bill 500 relating to Class Y special crossbow hunting permit and reports back a committee substitute for same. And Senate Bill 501 relating to North Bend Rail Trail, Greenbrier River Trail, and Elk River Trail, and reports by committee substitute for same, with the recommendation that the 4 committee substitutes do pass. Respectfully submitted, Bill Hamilton, Chair.
Report will be received.
Your Committee on the Judiciary has had under consideration Senate Bill 509 relating to custodial allocation actions of independent of divorce and reports the same back with the recommendation that it do pass. Respectfully submitted, Charles S. Trump IV, Chair.
Report will be received.
Your Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure has had under consideration Senate Concurrent Resolution 3, naming the U.S. Army Master Sergeant Richard A. Dick Smoot Memorial Bridge, and reports the same back with the recommendation that it be adopted. Respectfully submitted, Chandler Swope, Vice Chair.
Report will be received.
That's all I have, sir.
Reports from select committees.
There are none.
Introduction of bills. The junior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that Senate Bills 575 through 597 be considered introduced, read by their titles, and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system.
Junior senator from the 17th requests unanimous consent that Senate Bill number 575 through Senate Bill number 597 be considered introduced, read by their titles, and referred to the appropriate committees as shown on the chamber automation system. Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Resolutions.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 8 by Senator Carmichael, Mr. President, naming the U.S. Army First Lieutenant Harold H. Fraser Memorial Bridge.
Under the rules of the Senate, the resolution will lie over one day.
Senate Resolution 12 by Senator Beach, designating January 23, 2020 as Human Resources Day.
Under the rules of the Senate, the resolution will lie over one day. Are there further resolutions?
No, sir.
Motions. Petitions?
There are none.
Unfinished business.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 4, urging Congress call convention to propose amendment on congressional term limits.
Question before the Senate is adoption of resolution. Is there discussion? The senator from Morgan County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Concurrent Resolution 4 was reported yesterday. We received the report on the floor of the Senate by the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it would add West Virginia's voice, if adopted by the entire legislature, to those of other states which have called upon the Congress to call a convention of the states under Article 5 of the United States Constitution for the purpose, limited to the purpose, of proposing amendments to the Constitution regarding setting a limit on the number of terms that a person may be elected as a member to the United States House of Representatives or member of the United States Senate. The concurrent resolution does not purport to answer that question, but rather asks for the Convention of States contemplated in Article 5 of the United States Constitution for such an amendment to be proposed. Members know that within the last generation, some states tried to, by legislative act, establish term limits for their respective senators and representatives in the United States Congress, and those cases were there were cases the United States Supreme Court decided which held that under the language of the existing Constitution, a state may not act unilaterally to do that, and it would require an amendment to the United States Constitution. So that is the purpose of this resolution, to have West Virginia be among those states which call for a convention of states for the limited purpose of proposing an amendment to the United States Constitution relating to term limits for the members of Congress of the United States. Mr. President, I'll be happy to try to answer questions. Otherwise, I urge adoption of the resolution.
Is there further discussion? the senator from Harrison County.
Thank you. This gentleman from Morgan to yield.
Senator yield. Senator does yield.
Certainly.
Senator, thank you. Let me just ask you a question. Do you agree that there's certainly a potential risk that a convening of an Article 5 convention can open up our entire Constitution to amendment? Would you agree there's a risk of that?
I don't think the risk is significant, but having said that, I will say that there are others who have expressed concern about that, including very eloquently my friend from Harrison County during our committee discussions. What I will say is that we have no precedent because there's never been an Article 5 convention, so we don't have a precedent or previous convention of states under the Article 5 of the United States Constitution to look to tell us exactly what happens or how it has happened previously, because it hasn't happened previously. So I will concede that there are legal scholars who think that it's possible that there could be a runaway convention.
So given that possibility, are you in agreement with the resolution that it's worth the risk of opening up our entire, not knowing what your answer is correct, that it's worth the risk of opening up our entire United States Constitution, which has been in place for 233 years, in order to bring a term limits amendment before the country? Do you think it's worth that risk?
I don't view the risk as significant. First of all, I think the language of the application is limited, and it's expressly limited, and it's for the limited purpose, limited to proposing amendments to the United States Constitution related to term limits. So I think there are limitations imposed by the resolution that would be adopted by West Virginia. That's one check and safeguard that I think mitigates the risk that you and others have articulated. Another mitigating factor, to me, a strong mitigating factor, is the ratification process. So even if we assume hypothetically a convention did run away from its limited expressed purpose in the resolution, the U.S. Constitution provides that the amendment to the Constitution occurs only upon the ratification of the amendment or amendments, the product of such a convention, by 3/4 of the states, which means with 50 states, 38. 38 states would have to ratify whatever work product comes out of such a convention. And I think that mitigates against the risk as well.
I appreciate that, Senator. You'll agree with me that the same legal scholars to which you referred, of which I am not one, but the same legal scholars believe that if an Article 5 convention is convened, that none of those, they will not be bound by any of the rules you just described as safeguards.
There are some who say that. I don't agree. But I have not heard anybody say, any legal scholar, any other person say that the ratification process is avoided or bypassed. It would still, any amendment proposed by a convention under Article 5 would still have to be ratified by 38 individual states before it could become part of the United States Constitution. And I've not heard anyone say that there's some bypass or a way to avoid that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator wishes to speak to the resolution. Yes, Senator is recognized to speak to the resolution.
Thank you. The first question this body has to ask is if I can stand here and talk for 6 straight weeks. I think it's a possibility. I'm not going to do that, though. It wouldn't make any difference anyways, because, I often think that the facts are meaningless down here. And this is one of those instances. This isn't about term limits. Term limits one way or the other probably would be beneficial to some degree. I think there's some negatives to it, but this isn't about term limits. Nor is it about a balanced budget amendment, which I think has come up several times before this body. It's a discussion about what is an Article 5 constitutional convention. And you know what? I don't know what it is. And neither does anybody else for sure, because there's no rules to govern an Article 5 convention. And the people who are telling the people in this body that it's not a risk, that it's not something to be worried about, they're just not being honest. You know, I'm afraid of it, or I would not be standing up here and spending all of my energy and resources and trying to persuade you not to vote for this. But let's take the last constitutional convention. So you got to know history. If you fail to know history, you're doomed to repeat it. And in 1787, there was a constitutional convention to amend the Articles of Confederation, which was our Constitution prior to the current one we have. Their mandate, their resolution was to find ways to improve trade between the states. And you know what they came up with? An entirely new Constitution. A good one that's worked for us for 233 years. They gave no consideration to what was in the Articles of Confederation, which said all 13 states must ratify any amendments. They did away with that in the Constitutional Convention. They weakened the states which were fiercely independent immediately following our resolution and strengthened the federal government. And they lowered the number of states necessary to ratify what they had created. Turned out okay. For those that don't know, the United States of America is the longest surviving national government in world history. Not in modern times, not in the last 500 years, in world history, the longest surviving national government. And it's all because of that paper that is the foundation of all rules that we make in this country. It is the rule of law. Now, what's going to happen if this goes through? And we're close. This makes us very close to having an Article 5 convention. Who knows? Who will be in charge at that time, by the time it comes about? You know, the pendulum swings back and forth. Who knows who will be in charge? Who knows what provisions of our Constitution will be put at risk? And when it comes out, don't think that there won't be billions of dollars to try to persuade our states one way or another on any particular issue. It also may be one extremely popular issue, cobbled together with a bunch of other changes to our Constitution. Nobody knows. And the senators who speak to it, including me, don't really know. And you can call it fear-mongering, but let me just say that there are constitutional scholars who I believe were brilliant men in their times. And today, let's start with Professor Bob Bastress. I spoke with him last night because it was brought up during the judiciary hearing that he said there wasn't any risk to an Article 5 Constitutional Convention. He says the exact opposite, that there is a risk. Let's go back to the first Supreme Court Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Jonathan Jay. He was the very first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He called an Article 5 convention an extravagant risk. James Madison, one of the writers of our Constitution, thought it was neither proper nor effective to include the Article 5 provision in the Constitution to restrain government. Alexander Hamilton dreaded the consequences of another constitutional convention and wanted to rid it from our Constitution. Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg said in an editorial in 1986 that it cannot be denied that the Philadelphia Convention of 1787, that's the one I just spoke about, broke every restraint intended to limit its power and agenda. And any attempt in limiting the agenda of an Article 5 Constitutional Convention would almost certainly be unenforceable. In other words, once it's convened, it's too late. We cannot restrain it. We all know Anton Scalia, Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And I would venture to guess that there's not a person in here that doesn't respect his opinion. His comment was clear when asked about an Article 5 Constitutional Convention. He said, "I certainly would not want a Constitutional Convention. I mean, whoa, who knows what would come out of that?" What he did say is he would like to have Congress pass an amendment to change Article 5 to set out the rules and procedures that would dictate how such a convention would work. So, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I would guess most of you are not constitutional scholars. I would certainly think we would be hard to deny that those gentlemen are not constitutional scholars. You know, after this session, I'm sure whoever the well-funded group is that wants term limits will attack me without any let up or ceasing in any way. It's been going on for about 5 months. I don't know whether they think they're intimidating me or trying to intimidate you. But they've got a hidden agenda. You don't spend tens of thousands of dollars attacking a West Virginia senator who's not even up for re-election unless you're going to make some money off of the end result. And as they always say, follow the money. We're playing with the United States Constitution. Our legislature, our Senate is playing with the United States Constitution. And if that doesn't concern you, if that doesn't cause you to be trepidatious in what we're about to do, then no fact will ever affect any decision that you make. The Constitution's a document of rules. It's not about term limits. It's about changing that for somebody's advantage. And you have to ask yourself, are term limits, as important as they may be, worth risking our United States Constitution? My answer is easy. It's not. When I sat down on the floor here at the end of last session, a lot of folks from both sides of the aisle came up and thanked me. I hope those that did search their souls a little bit and ask themselves why they were thankful we didn't have to vote on this resolution last year, and vote the way your conscience tells you. I can assure you, we're not playing with term limits. We're not playing with the amount of time people can spend in Congress. We're playing with fire. I urge a no vote on this resolution, Mr. President.
Further discussion, the senator from Cabell County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do support term limits in the Congress. But I think the senator from Harrison is on to something when he continually says, follow the money. And I'll tell you why. West Virginia is the 40th most populous state. We're 40. And I think most of us that have paid attention to the argument we've had in committee and here are thinking, well, 35 states have to ratify whatever that convention does. 35 states have to ratify it. So that gives us a pretty good chance that we could stop something that would not be good for us. When Senator Tom Cotton was here advocating for the balanced budget amendment to open up this process, I got him to admit under oath that one of the plans here was to explore abolishing the federal income tax. That would be one thing I guarantee at this convention, again, follow the money, that would be thrown in. Well, let's just also talk about this. We'll do the term limits over here, but let's abolish the federal income tax, follow the money. And then the next thing they're going to do, in my opinion, and I'm fairly confident of this, Puerto Rico is the 31st of the states and territories and population. Puerto Rico's at 31. We're at 40. There are a lot of small states like us. The Virginia plan, when that convention met in 1787, was not 2 senators for every state. The Virginia plan was to base the Senate, to base the Congress on population. California has 40 million people. You don't think they're going to shuffle the deck on the United States Senate? You don't think they're going to look at places like the Dakotas have 4 senators. They have less people than we do. You don't think they're going to be in play? Rhode Island, Vermont, West Virginia. You don't think Texas might make a deal with New York and California and Florida? The small states, smaller than Puerto Rico, that we're one of, can plan on not having 2 senators. So you open up the door. I support term limits. You open up the door to this meeting that's going to be well-funded and well-intentioned, and the money is going to dictate what happens. And it's just like when the Russians pay attention to our elections and maybe interfere. That sounds great if they're helping my party, but you can't count on the Russians to help my party every time. Just because we think that this group that advocates for the convention is on our side, when it gets there, whose side will they be on? Thank you.
Further discussion. The senator from Wood County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the chairman yield for just a
Senator
question
from
or two, please?
Morgan yield. Senator does yield.
Mr. Chairman's a good historian. I just want to run a few things by you. Let me just set it up first by saying that Article 5 it's a constitutional article. That's where we get the authority for this constitutional convention, so-called, is from the Constitution itself, right?
It is. There is an Article 5. It's one of the articles of the United States Constitution, and it addresses specifically the processes by which the United States Constitution may be amended.
Okay, and then after they come out of they have the convention, they have a convention on term limits, say, and then it goes back to the states for ratification. Is that 38 states? Is that correct after that?
3/4 of the states. So with 50 states, that means 38. That's
so
correct.
If there was a so-called runaway convention, these 38 states could certainly put a check on that runaway convention, could they not?
13 of the states could put a check on it.
13 or more, right? As many as 13 could put a check on this so-called runaway convention. So if it gets out of hand and there's 100 different calls that they approve and they're crazy and wild, and the states could say, okay, hold on, this has gone far enough, we're not going to do that. All we'd need is 13 or more states to say that, correct?
To say we're not going to ratify this amendment or these amendments.
Okay, and when the founders came out of the Constitutional Convention of 1787, that supposedly was a runaway convention from which we got the greatest Constitution ever in the history of mankind, as the senator from Harrison said. They apparently weren't afraid of a runaway convention, were they? Because they put Article 5 into the Constitution. Would that follow logically?
Well, Article 5 is part of the United States Constitution.
And they wrote the Article 5 after they came out of the Constitutional Convention that was supposedly a runaway convention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a couple statements in favor of this. I think Article 5 is a great thing. It's a check on tyranny. It's basically saying, look, we have no other recourse here. If you look at what's happening in Virginia right now, one of the most beautiful displays of our republic, of organic democracy, happened in Virginia this week. The people rose up. But so what if the people rise up and the tyrants, that I like to call them sometimes, that are in office still say, I don't care. I don't care. This is an avenue, a tool that the founders gave us because they were students of history and they know how easily tyrants rise, authoritarian governments rise. And that's what this is for. This Article 5 draws its authority from the Constitution and only to the extent permitted by the application and cause. Its authority is therefore limited to the scope of those documents narrower than the authority of the Constitutional Convention. So keep in mind also that the founders didn't put the rules in the Constitution because the founders were limited government guys. They were bureaucracy guys. They were, here's the principle, America and posterity. Here's the principle. You're smart enough a moral and republic people are smart enough to do the rules themselves, to say, look, we're going to have an Article 5 convention. This is what it's going to be on. It's going to be on term limits or balanced budget or whatever. And we're responsible, freedom-loving people, and this is how we're going to do it. And I'm not the biggest guy in the world for term limits. I think it's good. But I am for Article 5. I am for Article 5. Because when tyrants rise, the founding fathers had said, look, here it is in the Constitution, and you can fight tyranny. This is America. We're a constitutional republic. And Article 5 is a beautiful thing. It brings tears to my eyes like Virginia did. When Americans rise up and say, look, this is a free country. We are born out of a great awakening, a Christian awakening that gave rise to the greatest country in the world. And Article 5 just is just a beautiful thing from the Constitution that God gave us. And it's something that we need to support. I strongly support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion, the junior senator from the 8th.
Yes, thank you. Will the senator from Oregon just yield for just a few questions?
Senator yield. Senator does yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. President. We had a long discussion on judiciary on this issue, and so I don't want to belabor what's already been said, but I just want to just go through just a few things. That there is no, I know that this resolution is narrow to term limits, but there is no binding authority rule from the courts or Congress as to that's only what's going to be discussed. Is that correct?
The senator, my friend from Kanawha, makes a fair point in that, as I mentioned earlier, there's never been a convention of states called under Article 5. So the Article 5 itself does not delineate detailed procedures for how a convention would work. It's actually very short. Let me, if I may, just in response to your question, read Article 5.
Yes,
I think that would help help us all focus. It's not very long. It'll take just a minute. It says the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. Now, there's another clause that relates to a limitation, but that's really all that it gives us in terms of procedures. Now, our Constitution, our United States Constitution, been amended 27 times, always by the first of the two methods. In other words, amendments proposed by the Congress of the United States and then ratified by 3/4 of the states. And, you know, but this is the process that the Constitution provides for the manner in which it may be amended.
Sure. But and I think we're on the same page. There is no binding authority to this resolution, that it's only term limits and nothing more, correct?
That's what it says. And I think the words have meaning. In other words, and my understanding is West Virginia would be the 16th, I think the 16th state to adopt this particular application. And so the Article 5 of the Constitution requires that the application has to be made by 2/3 legislatures of 2/3 of the state, which means 34 states total have to apply with basically identical language. An application for Congress to call the convention. You know, the question is for what? Well, it's for the purpose, in my opinion, for the purpose and limited to the purpose that's expressed in the resolution that we adopt or not.
And I appreciate you reading the Article 5, because when we talk about what would happen after a convention, the ratification by the states, the Article 5 says by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, correct?
That's what it says.
So this goes forward. The worst happens, term limits and a couple other things are ratified by that convention. Then it comes back to the states, but it's not ratified by the legislatures. It's ratified by a convention of folks, correct?
It could be
potentially.
Potentially could be either one. Let me go back to Article 5 here, and because it provides that the manner of ratification, one way or the other, by legislature or by conventions in the states, is to be determined. Let me read the exact language. When ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. And so 2/3 of the states have to make the application to Congress, and it has to be essentially identical. So that means 34 states have to apply, as this would propose to do. Congress, we urge you, please call a convention for this purpose. And if the convention meets and produces an amendment, proposes an amendment, let me back up. When the Congress reacts to that and calls the convention, it must delineate, as I read Article 5 of the Constitution, the Congress must delineate the mode of ratification. So if the convention produces an amendment to be proposed, the Congress will have said in the call it issues whether it will be whether ratification will be by vote of the legislatures of the states or by conventions in the states. And as my friend from Kanawha will remember, yesterday in committee, our colleague from Jefferson County indicated that at least there's one historical incidence of the ratification process being the latter, conventions in the states, as opposed to acts of the legislature to ratify.
Well, on that point, I think it was after the Congress had passed the amendment, and then it was ratified by the states.
Yes, those were every amendment we've had to our Constitution, all 27, were proposed by the Congress, and then...
But that wasn't an Article 5.
We've never had an Article 5.
Exactly, and that's my point.
Well, we say the amendment process, amendments proposed by Congress is also within Article 5. So we've never had a convention as contemplated by Article 5 would be a more accurate statement.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator wish to speak to the resolution? Yes.
I wasn't prepared to speak, Mr. President, but a couple of things that I just wanted to tack on. I do not oppose term limits. I don't think it's the tyranny that this Article 5 was created for. I think that's pretty clear. But I think that there are just too many unknowns with regard to who attends the convention, what authority binds a convention, whether or not the legislature is ratified or it's by another convention of folks. That's not how the voice of the people have heard. We're responsible, or the elected officials in D.C. are responsible for that. And I just think that this is just not good policy. And I'll just leave it at that. My good friend from Harrison covered everything as eloquently as he always does. And I urge opposition to this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other members desiring to speak to the resolution? The senator from Tucker County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I feel I should get up and speak since I'm the one who started all this. And I must say, I've been waiting for the whole session for the Russians to come into this, and it finally, the Russians got into the Article 5 today, so I guess we're good now. But the bottom line here is Congress is out of control. I would hope that no one in this body could disagree with me. It's their approval rating is at an all-time low. They have, just not in the past 4 years or 2 years, but they continue to pass legislation or rules they change the rules anytime they want to. We're all worried about them somebody changing the rules. If we call an Article 5, they change them every day. The impeachment procedure is going on. I mean, the rules change. I mean, they make up the rules as they go. They exempted themselves from Social Security. They have, crippled our Social Security system for us working folks, but it's good enough for us, but it's not good enough for them. They're under their own retirement plan. Obamacare. But Obamacare was great for everybody, but our Congress, they eliminated themselves from that. They have their own insurance plan. It's good enough for their constituents, the people they represent, but it's not good enough for them. And I could go on and on and on about a runaway Congress, about how they have forgot how or who they serve, the people of this great republic of ours. And this is an article. This is an article, not articles. It's an article. So we're talking one article. I think a lot of the opposition to this is because some people got their feelings hurt because of bad publicity. And I mean, I know all about bad publicity. I got a lot of it when I was running for this seat. I always said, don't have to worry about if you want a background check, don't just run for office and somebody will do it for you. And so I get that, And dark money, it's like, it's all right for this group to have dark money and do what they want to do, but it's not all right for that group there. They can't spend. I mean, these are citizens. I've had as many, and if you people be honest, you've had as many citizens lobby for this, more citizens lobby for this than any one lobby group. And the lobby group is supported by citizens for this. So, you want to call it dark money, call it money. I say it's the average citizen using their ability to have their voice heard. These groups are funded by citizens from donations, and I support them. I'm a citizen, and I'm fed up. And if anybody in here is not fed up with what's going on, then shame on you. This is a last resort to fix a problem that Congress will not. They refuse to do it. And why would they go? If you go into a federal office, I mean, no one here is to get rich. No one's in this position at the state level as a part-time legislator. You know as well as I do, it costs you more money to serve in this seat than you ever make. You're doing it because you want to make a change. Excuse me. But that's not what happens at the federal level. If you're not a millionaire when you go in, you're going to be a millionaire when you come out. And some of these people stay in there for years and years and years. And I know everybody says, elections is our term limits, which sometimes they are. But when we're fighting against states the size of California and New York, everything that's going on in D.C. now is controlled basically by those two states. I'd say at least 95% by California and New York. So we don't have a voice in it now. I mean, you don't believe me? Research it a little bit. Look, see who's on all the major committees, speakers, the speakers, majority leaders, all of them. It comes from two states. The purpose of this amendment is to propose an amendment to the Constitution. Everybody makes it, or some of them makes it sound like we're going in and we're going to rip the Constitution apart. It's not going in to rip the Constitution apart. It's an amendment. And to be honest with you, this one, it's only been tried one time. And guess what? Congress didn't let it happen. They took care of the problem. And that's what will happen this time. I'll guarantee you Congress is not going to let it go far enough that we call convention a state. All this is a statement to our Congress from the states that they represent that we want something changed. Now either you do it or we're going to do it by the rights given to us by the Constitution. And regardless of what the gentleman from Harrison says, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I mean, I've learned a lot of things in the coal mines, but it wasn't the Constitution. So I don't confess to be a constitutional scholar, but I do know the Constitution well enough that this gives us a right to do this. And there's so many checks and balances in this. I mean, it's got to be ratified by 38 states. And the gentleman said 13 can stop it. So there's checks and balances in there to stop this. This isn't going to be like a runaway freight train. I said in committee meeting, it's like they're trying to make this like it's the boogeyman. It's not. It's another tool in our tool chest that was put in here by our forefathers for our republic. And we've got every right to use it, to send a message to our representatives in Washington that we're watching you and we want something done. Well, I'm not against term limits in the state level. I think that's a great idea. You know what I mean? What's good for the goose is for the gander. And I'll even introduce the bill. In fact, I probably will. So I don't get accused of being self-serving. And it's simple. It's simple. If you're for term limits, if you believe that it's time for term limits, then vote yes for this. Simple as that. Vote yes for it. If you're against term limits and you want things to go on the way they are, you don't want a voice in what's going on, vote no. I mean, we do it every day here. We either vote yay, or we vote nay. And it's as simple as that. The sun's going to come up tomorrow if we pass this. The sun's going to come up tomorrow if we don't pass this. 5 years from now, some of you will still be in here fighting over some of this stuff, but doesn't really, it's not going to keep the world from turning. All this is a statement to our Congress that we want to see some changes, that we want some attention. 81% of the people polled in West Virginia, and I don't believe polls, but 81% is a pretty persuading poll, agrees with this. They're fed up too. It's just not me fed up. It's not just you fed up. The citizens in the state of West Virginia is fed up with this, and they want to see some checks and balances put in. So to me, maybe I'm too simple-minded, but to me it's not complicated. This is a tool we got. Let's use it and see where it goes. Is it going to tear the Constitution apart? Everyone in here knows this isn't going to turn the Constitution apart. I mean, you can say what you want to, but deep down it might make some changes. But this is one article that Congress proposed term limits, or that we do it if the Congress refuses to do it. And I'm not a betting man, but I'd take a bet if this comes up where you get 30 or 34 states to call the convention, that you're going to see Congress, that they're going to open their eyes, and you're going to see talk about this going forward, because they don't want our hands in their cookie jar. I can tell you that right now. So like I said in closing, Mr. President, if you're for term limits, vote yes or yay. If you're against term limits, vote nay. It's just as simple as that, and I request the yays and nays. Thank you, Mr. President.
So further discussion. The senator from Braxton County.
Thank you, Mr. President. I came into this chamber this morning not thinking I was going to say anything about this, but you all know what I know about being a constitutional scholar or something like that. I'm a 12-year educated guy from Braxton County school system. But until recently, the one thing I never heard talked about in this country was our Constitution. See, I was always brought up thinking that we had the greatest government in the world, and that it was because of our Constitution that we had that. Now, we've heard arguments on both sides, and it's somewhat like arguing which is the prettiest car, blue or red. It depends on the team you're on and how you feel about this. But you know what seems a little peculiar to me? When the folks that want this convention first started, it wasn't about term limits. They wanted a balanced budget. Well, they couldn't get anywhere with that. So now we changed the reason. But you you got to ask yourself, is the real reason they want this about the budget? Couldn't sell that one, so now we've changed. I've heard talk about democracy and tears to our eyes and things like that. But you know what I've found about democracy? We like it when it goes the way that we want it to go. But when democracy goes the other way, we're not so fond of it. For instance, if some group, a religious group that none of us here believes in, would for some reason get in control and have the votes to pass, making their religion the religion of this country, what would we think about democracy then? So we've got to be careful about talking about how we like democracy. But I got a little bit of a different take on this whole thing. What we're saying here now is we do not have confidence in the citizens of this country. See, it's the citizens of this country who should make the decision of whether you stay in office or not. It shouldn't be a rule. It shouldn't be a law or something like that, because see, those laws in the hands of the wrong people can take good people out. We have an election process, and it's stood pretty darn good for this country for the last several hundred years. That's how things should be done. And what we're doing now is we're saying we don't trust the people to vote for who they want to represent them. We need to have a term limit. And this 81% of the people that's polled and they don't like it, why don't they vote? You can change this by voting. If you don't like who's representing you, that's why we have elections for. But see, when you say you're for democracy, but you take away the power of the vote, are you really for democracy? That's the question you have to answer yourself, because to me what we're saying here is the people aren't smart enough to elect their representatives, so we need to put term limits in to supersede that. But at the end of all this argument, because we're not going to change your mind, you're not going to change our mind, the real question is, and I for God's sake, I hope I'm wrong, do we want to risk this opportunity to let our Constitution get torn apart in this convention? Because there's none of us here actually know for sure. I mean, we've heard that on both sides. Nobody actually knows for sure. The rules are not wrote on how this happens. So the real question is, are we so disgruntled with our country that we're going to take a chance on messing the greatest government in the world up over term limits? And I think we all really know that this is about more than term limits. And I just think we need to be real careful, because this could quite possibly be the most important vote that we ever cast as legislators in this state. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other members desiring to speak to the resolution? I'll remind the members also, Rule 8 of the Senate requires the members to address the President during discussions and remarks and so forth. I think sometimes we may get away from that. Are there other members desiring to speak? I recognize the Senator from Marion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Judiciary Chairman yield?
Senator yield. Senator does yield.
Yes.
To my distinguished colleague, I'm far from a constitutional lawyer and probably stepping into some gray areas, but I'm trying to make some sense of this. This resolution is specifically directed at term limits for our congressional members in Congress, correct?
Yes, sir. That is the sole purpose of the resolution.
Okay, if we pass this resolution and 34 states join us in doing it, there will be an Article 5 constitutional convention.
Two-thirds of the states. So it requires two-thirds to, the Congress is required by the Constitution to act when it has applications from two-thirds of the states.
So who will represent the states when this convention is convened?
It's a great question. I think each state would have to pass legislation to address that very question, to designate a process by which delegates would be chosen, to limit in some fashion their authority at such a convention, I would be in favor of that, to have legislation that makes clear that a person has only authority to act within the scope of the resolution, no other matters. But it would be up to each state to decide who the delegates would be to such a convention of the states on behalf of West Virginia.
So those representatives would be chosen on population? I mean, how many would West Virginia get? Would we get 5? We have 2 senators and 3 congresspersons?
Great question. The conventional wisdom, and again, we're dealing with a process that's never occurred. But the conventional wisdom is that irrespective of how many delegates a state may send, each state would get 1 vote.
Each state gets only 1 vote?
That would be my belief. Yes.
But we don't really know. And it's the unknown that sort of frightens us all. I mean, we don't want to know where this goes. I mean, if the question is on term limits, I mean, it is pretty simple, like the senator from Tucker, stated. You're either for it or against it. But the unknown, by having a constitutional convention, it is certainly unknown. We don't have the answers, and we're going into a real gray area. And the only part of our history we can go back to is in 1787, when we did have an Article 5 convention, and everything was changed.
Well, it wasn't an Article 5 convention. Article 5 exists in the convention, in the Constitution that was produced by that 1787 convention. So there was a convention in 1787. There are those who hold the view that that was convened by Congress, others who hold the view that it was convened by Virginia. The call for that was from Virginia, and it was not. The original call and assemblage in Philadelphia in that hot summer was not limited to the reformation of the Articles of Confederation. But to your point, to your larger point, there's never been a convention called by the Congress of the United States under Article 5 of our United States Constitution. That's true.
So it's really uncertain. I guess the question is then, if this process goes into play and we have 1 representative from West Virginia, will that individual be given a certain task of only voting on term limits? I mean, since I
think it's a great question. I think that individual or those individuals could be limited in that fashion by legislative enactment.
So, but if all the states get together and all the representatives get together, and other states aren't bound by their resolution for term limits, and they're not given specific instructions, they would be allowed, obviously, to present their concern, and then we would all vote on it. Our delegate then would be, bound to vote on whatever issue that came up.
Well, I don't know bound to vote. I think a legislature of a state could pass law that limits the authority of a delegate to such a convention to vote in one fashion or another. And for instance, I'd say it's a convention to address congressional term limits. I think the legislature of West Virginia could pass a law that says our delegate may not vote for a limitation on terms of office for members of Congress that is less than 12 years or that is more than 20 years. I think those sorts of binding instructions could be made by any state that chose to do it.
But we're not saying what the limits are in this resolution.
This resolution doesn't address it at all. It calls for the conversation on the subject, if you will. It doesn't purport to answer that question.
Was there any discussion in judiciary on what the limits should be?
Not really, because you have to first get to the step where the states have applied for a sufficient or requisite number of states have applied for the Congress to call the convention to have the conversation. In other words, and I want to correct something that one of the other members said during debate. We've passed other convention of state resolutions. We passed one, both houses of this legislature in 2016, calling for a convention of states, asking Congress to call a convention of the states on the subject of the balanced budget, balanced federal budget. I sort of lost your question. Your question was
on the amount of term limits. I mean,
and so
what should it be?
we didn't really have
2 terms, 3 terms, 4 terms.
None of that is precluded by the document before us.
So you firmly believe that there should be congressional term limits?
I'm not even sure of that per se, but I am not afraid to have the conversation or to have a convention of the states to consider amendments.
So if it's applicable to Congress, would it not also be applicable to state legislature, our state legislature?
The scope of this resolution addresses only, let me just read it to you, limit on the number of terms that a person may be elected as a member of the United States House of Representatives or as a member of the United States Senate. So it's limited only to the federal legislative offices. Of course, this legislature could propose an amendment to our state constitution and impose term limits for state legislators. We don't have to ask for the help of Congress in getting to that question.
So it's okay for this legislature that those that believe in term limits should it be only applicable to our Congress, not to our state legislature?
Well, what I would say is that the document before us is an application for the Congress to call the convention for the purpose of proposing limits on the terms of office of the federal legislatures, members of the federal legislature.
You and I have been here several years, and obviously I've learned a lot of things by being here. I mean, when I first came to this legislature, I'm an educator, and my scope of the issues was fairly limited. But as I got down here, I learned more about health care. I learned, more how government works. I learned about the finances of the state and things of that sort. And that became invaluable to me. Why would we prohibit anybody from running for an office, whether it be on the federal level or the state level, with the idea that we go back every 2 or 4 years to our constituents and stand before them and ask them for our support predicated on the work that we've done. I mean, why do we want to limit that?
All right. Well, I want to give a two-part answer to your question. First of all, I'm not so sure that I personally want to do that. What I would say is, and this resolution, if adopted, does not automatically do that. It just opens up the process by which the conversation can occur for members of the Congress, the federal legislature. As to your example and analogy, let me say this. I'll take the liberty to answer the question this way. It would take me weeks to expound and express what I've learned in the legislative process from you, from the distinguished minority leader. And I'm grieved, as many of us are, that you have apparently announced you're choosing not to run again. And I think it'll be a tremendous loss to this state. So that's my answer to that.
Pretty hard to come back, isn't it? I simply don't understand. I mean, I look around this body and I see a lot of good people. The senator from Pleasance is the longest serving legislator, I think, in both houses, and I certainly respect her, and the people of her district certainly have to respect her, or she wouldn't have that longevity. I just am afraid of opening this thing up to areas that we're not, well grounded, and we don't know the answer. And that's what scares me, asking people to vote on a resolution that seems harmless, by looking at it. You're either for term limits or against it. And if I would be certain that, our one representative would go and just vote on that issue, I would be more apt to vote for this thing, but not knowing, I haven't heard anyone convince me that this is a good idea.
Well, it would be less than candid of me to say, so I will say again, there are unknown elements here. We are dealing with, because there's no precedent. I am resting and sleeping at night if this resolution is adopted, the balanced budget amendment that we adopted 4 years ago, because I know that no amendment to the Constitution can be made unless 38 of the 50 states ratify it. I think it helps me appease any, ease any concerns I might otherwise have about, a convention or the Congress even producing something that's not good.
Thank you. I appreciate your.
Thank you.
Are there senators recognized to speak to the resolution?
I'd just like to follow up. I mean, we've had in our history a lot of great representatives, and one that stands out in my mind is Robert C. Byrd. I don't believe there was anybody that was more a constitutional lawyer than Robert C. Byrd. I mean, when he voted, was the only one that voted and stood upon his grounds, and he was elected yearly, Mr. President. I mean, every time he ran, sometimes there weren't even people that ran against him because he did the job. He represented West Virginia well. I see our two senators now, Senator Manchin, Senator Capito. They're especially Senator Capito. She's young enough to be there for a long time. For us to hinder her serving our state, I think we're doing a great injustice to ourselves. I think we better be very cautious about where we go with this resolution. I'm not sure that it's well grounded in just term limits, and I would just ask our members in this body to express some caution and think about what we're doing when we make this vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are there other members desiring to speak to the resolution before I recognize the senator for more? I recognize the senator for Jefferson County for a brief remark.
Thank you, and this will be brief. I just want to point out something that hasn't been brought up by anybody already, and that is that the reason there has never been an Article 5 convention is because every single time the states have ratified anywhere close to the two-thirds needed, Congress has acted. It is like a warning bell to Congress that we feel there's some problems, and they have acted. And just one last thing, in terms of there not being a precedent for what will happen, there's something called the Uniform Law Commission, which I'm not super familiar with. I'm sure there are those here that are. But it's a convention of states, and it's one state, one vote. So we do have a precedent for what happens when we have a state convention, and I'm assuming we'll probably follow that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Other members desiring to speak for the resolution? Seeing none, recognize the senator from Morgan to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be brief. We've had a great discussion and debate here. I think talked through most of the issues. I will say we certainly should not be afraid of the amendment process. The process of amending our Constitution, it's been amended 27 times under Article 5, albeit not by convention, but certainly we would all recognize that some of our most cherished rights are expressed in amendments to the Constitution. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, free exercise of religion, the right for peaceable assembly, to petition the government for redress of grievances. The Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. The Fourth Amendment, the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. We should not fear at all amendments to the Constitution that are carefully considered and ratified through the proper process by 3/4 of the states. That's where many of our most cherished rights lie, in amendments, in the Bill of Rights, which are all amendments. I'm not afraid to have this conversation, Mr. President. I think this state should not be afraid to have the conversation. I don't know what the ultimate outcome will be, but I'm comfortable with West Virginia adding its voice to the 15 other states that have asked for Congress to open the conversation on this question. I urge adoption of the resolution.
Question for the Senate is adoption of resolution. Yeas and nays have been demanded. Is the demand sustained? The demand is sustained. All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? So the clerk will close the machine to ascertain the results on this question being 20 yeas, 10 nays, 4 absent not voting, more than the majority of those present and voting having voted in the affirmative. I declare the resolution adopted. Clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House. Is there further unfinished business?
Yes, sir. Senate Resolution 11 designating January 22nd, 2020 as Disability Advocacy Day.
Junior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that the resolution be taken up for immediate consideration, committee reference dispensed with, and the resolution be placed upon its adoption.
Is there objection? Chair hears none. Clerk will please read the resolution.
Senate Resolution 11 designating January 22nd, 2020 as Disability Advocacy Day.
Question before the Senate is adoption of the resolution. Is there discussion? Is there discussion? The Junior Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. On this resolution, as the very last part of it, as the clerk will be reading it, it says that the purposes of Disability Advocacy Day is to increase the awareness and understanding of legislators, administrators, policymakers, and the public about the issues that are important to individuals with disabilities. And as I was going through and considering putting this resolution before the legislature, for the Senate, it brought a lot of people to mind. I'm a physical therapist, and over the years, I've got to see people who are very able-bodied suddenly become less abled in very dramatic ways. We have a member of our Senate that's happened to here recently. And I've got to see people who are born less abled and the challenges they have. One of the things that we had to do in physical therapy school is we had to spend this is just one incidence of somebody who would have more challenges. We had to spend an entire day in a wheelchair without somebody assisting us. So you have an able-bodied individual, and I went to school at the University of Kentucky, and in PT school there, you had to park in a gravel parking lot. And so I parked, usually because that's when I got there, all the way to the back of this parking lot, and it was a good 300 yards to get into where I had to get to before I got to concrete. So my day spending in the wheelchair to take it home, I had to wheel uphill in a gravel parking lot by myself with my backpack, up and across the street, try to find the entrances on and off sidewalks, try to avoid the busted areas of the sidewalks, and then take my breaks. Now, think of your busiest morning when you're running out the door. And you're going in, you're brushing your teeth, getting your hair brushed, washing your face, taking your shower, getting your breakfast, grabbing your coffee, and you're rushing to get out the door and then get to where you're going to go. And then take a moment and just limit your abilities, maybe tie your right hand behind your back and do the same thing and see how fast you get out the door. Things we take for granted every day are extreme challenges for many people in the state of West Virginia. There's about 400,000 right now that have disabilities in West Virginia. And so today we're recognizing those challenges they have and the issues that they find important. So I'm very honored to be able to introduce this resolution, and I would urge its support. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Further discussion? Not. The question before the Senate is adoption of the resolution. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the resolution adopted. Junior Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate stand in brief recess for the purposes of presenting the resolution.
Junior Senator from the 17th moves that the Senate stand in brief recess for the purpose of presenting this resolution. All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Declare the Senate in brief recess to present this resolution. Senate will please come to order. The Senate will please come to order. Further unfinished business?
There is none.
Bills on third reading.
Engrossed Senate Bill 307, correcting code citation relating to certain tax liens. Third reading of the bill.
Question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? Is there discussion? The senior senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. The purpose of Senate Bill 307 is to correct an internal citation error in a single section of the code that occurred after passage of Senate Bill 405 last session. I'll entertain questions. Otherwise, I urge passage of the bill.
Further discussion? Not. All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? So the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question being 28 yeas. Question for the Senate is, shall the bill pass? Clerk will, all those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? So the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question being 29 yeas, 0 nays, 5 absent and not voting, more than the majority of those present and voting having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. Clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House. Further bills on third reading.
Engrossed Senate Bill 322, relating to pre-qualifications for state contract vendors. Third reading of the bill.
Question before the Senate is, shall the bill pass? Is there discussion? The senior senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Current law allows expedited procurement through the use of pre-qualified vendors, but only for commodities. The purpose of Senate Bill 322 is to allow the use of pre-qualified vendor process to procure services as well as commodities. The Office of Technology requested the bill, and because of the way technology is delivered by vendors, will benefit most from it. The Purchasing Division supports the bill as well. I will entertain questions. Otherwise, I urge passage of the bill.
Is there further discussion? Not. The question for the Senate is, shall the bill pass? All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? So the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results. On this question being 29 yeas, 0 nays, 5 absent and not voting, more than the majority of those present and voting having voted in the affirmative, I declare the bill passed. Clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House. Further bills on third reading?
No, sir.
Bills on second reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 192, relating to West Virginia Secondary School Activities Commission audit. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
Yes, sir. Senator Rucker moved to amend the bill on page...
Recognize the senator from Jefferson County.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is just technical cleanup to...
Senator from Jefferson County requests unanimous consent to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Senator from Jefferson County.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is technical cleanup in order to bring the language of the bill in conformity with an amendment that we passed in the committee. I'm happy to answer any questions. I urge passage.
Further discussion? Is there further discussion? Not. All those in favor of the senator's amendment will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Declare the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
Not. The bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 297, requiring Board of Education create home economics course. Second reading of the bill.
Are there amendments to the bill?
Yes, sir. Senator Beach moved to amend the
Senator
bill.
from Monongalia County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unanimous consent to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read.
Is there objection? Chair hears none. Senator may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the language that we are striking here is simply archaic language. The words home economics is no longer used in today's traditional message of family and consumer sciences. It strikes home economics and adds the words family and consumer sciences. I'd like to continue to speak to the bill, if I may, with a right to close.
Yes. Senator is recognized to speak to his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the bill is just 11 lines long. It's a very short piece of legislation. It passed out of education unanimously, I will say, and I don't think there's a better subject that we could talk about today than consumer sciences. To read the bill, and I will go through it real quick, persons with an understanding of consumer sciences, family and consumer sciences, are better prepared to perform everyday activities such as cooking, sewing, house cleaning, home minor repairs, budgeting, and time management. The final 3 sentences replicates the same thing. To provide students with a basic familiarity with those issues, the State Board shall develop a program of instruction in home economics on specific subjects, family and consumer sciences, that may be integrated in the curriculum of for students in secondary schools. The new language does not change the intent of the bill. It's to focus on students and everyday activities that students, we would hope, would already be aware of, but it does focus on those activities, again, house cleaning, sewing, cooking, budgeting, and time management.
Is there further discussion? Recognize the senator from Jefferson County.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I appreciate the senator's amendment and his attempt to just update the language. I have to respectfully oppose it, only because, like he said, this passed out unanimously. We did get language from the State Board of Education that helped to craft the language that we should use, and it's not really necessary. We allow for any subject that includes what people perceive as home economics, so I just have to say, I just feel that it's not necessary, so we oppose the amendment.
Is there further discussion? Before I recognize the senator from Monongalia to close debate, further discussion? Recognize the senator from Monongalia to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I know it seems like a minor change, and that it has no impact on the bill by leaving it with the archaic language that's presently in place. But in fact, it does, ladies and gentlemen, have a major significant impact on our public school system. Point being that by using the words home economics, groups out there like the Perkins grants do not recognize the terminology home economics. They recognize family and consumer sciences. Now, any of you who have been a grant writer at any time in your past knows that grants are very specific. The language must be very specific to make it over the numerous hurdles that are involved in the grant-making process. So what we're doing here, by allowing home economics to remain in the bill, we're denying our school system access to millions and millions of dollars in Perkins grants. And for that reason, I ask that you support the amendment. Thank you.
Question for the Senate is adoption of the amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Declare the amendment adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
No, sir.
Bill will be engrossed and advanced to third reading. Are there further bills on second reading?
No, sir.
Bills on first reading. Junior Senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that all bills on first reading be considered read a first time and advanced to second reading.
Is there objection? Chair hears none. Introduction of guest. The senator from Introduction of guest. Senator from Brooke County.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Senator from Ohio and myself, I'd like to recognize in the rear gallery are the folks from RED, which is the Regional Economic Development Group in Ohio County. They represent several counties in the Panhandle and around the Panhandle, do a lot of good work attracting industry and businesses to our area. So I'd like to make them feel welcome here in the Senate. Thank you, Mr. President.
There are further introductions. Remarks by members of the Senate. The Senator from Brooke County.
Thank you, Mr. President. In light of the spirited debate that we had today on the resolution and the history discussion, which I loved, that we had in here, I have to give credit where credit is due. And I was pleased to see that yesterday the State Board of Education through a statement that was put out by our state superintendent, has decided not to revise our social studies requirements in high school, and there won't be a proposal any longer to cut one of the required social studies courses. So I applaud the state board and the superintendent for their actions, and look forward to working with them as we go through the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Further remarks by members? Miscellaneous business. The clerk has a voting sentiment filed.
Had Senator Unger been present in the chamber on Friday, January 17th, he would have voted yea on the following bills: Senate Bill 35, Senate Bill 46, Senate Bill 140, Senate Bill 170, Senate Bill 207, Senate Bill 310.
The senior senator from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that my voting sentiment be recorded in the journal as reported.
Without objection, so ordered. Miscellaneous business. The junior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pending announcements, I move the Senate stand adjourned until tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Are there announcements? The senator from Morgan County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on the Judiciary will meet today at 3 p.m. in room 208, West Wing.
Further announcements? The junior senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Select Committee on Children's and Family will meet tomorrow in 208 West Wing at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.
The junior senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Finance will meet at 3 p.m. this afternoon in the Finance Committee room for budget hearings from the Parkways Authority and the Department of Transportation. And there will be no committee meeting Thursday morning. Thank you.
Senator from Preston County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development will meet today in 208 West at 2 p.m.
Further announcements? The senator from Wood County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Pensions will meet today at 2 o'clock in room 451M.
Further announcements? The senator from Mercer County.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Economic Development will meet today at 1 p.m. 208 West.
Further announcements? Are there further announcements? If not, question before the Senate is, shall the Senate stand adjourned until tomorrow at 11 a.m.? All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the Senate adjourned until tomorrow at 11 a.m.